Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lore Lodge Official Podcast. Tonight, Sunday, we have a showdown, more of a discussion and probably a lot of laughing at stupid people between me and Miniminuteman, who's over here on the other side of your screen. Milo, you want to say hi to the people?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Milo. You may know me as Miniminuteman. I am an archaeology content creator on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all those things. Most recently, I have been doing a series covering Ancient Apocalypse, which is the Netflix documentary series by Graham Hancock, analyzing his theory that there was a lost world-conquering civilization at the end of the last ice age, which is going to be one of the jumping off points of our discussion here tonight. So I know that, Aiden is not familiar with the arguments I made. Other Aiden is familiar with the arguments I made. So we're going to just have a little bit of an open forum here and sort of, analyze some of his points, see if they hold any water, and, kind of hear a little bit of a back and forth.
Yep, that's, I decided I would not watch Milo's videos so that I could come into this not knowing his arguments. I figured that was fair.
No hard feelings, Aiden. I forgive you.
I will watch them after this because I am genuinely curious to see your analysis. I know when it comes to live format versus research format, there's always things that you remember to do when you're doing the live and not, or when you're doing the recorded and not so much when you remember to do the live. So
absolutely,
last time I think we had you on, it was mainly we were gonna argue about the reality of like the Wendigo and skinwalkers and all of that, and then the whole millennial thing derailed it.
Oh man, I forgot it, dude.
That was like a year ago.
Man, I'm glad we don't have to worry about that derailing this again.
God.
That was a nightmare.
She was a mess. It seems like she got banned and she's down to like 10,000 followers. So I'm all
Let's
good.
go.
She still slanders me on Twitter,
people.
which is okay.
She's dedicated. Credit where credit is due. Good for her.
I think she's just bored. I was actually about a month ago. I was very close to her way, and I was like, do I stop by and like wave?
Oh
like,
yeah.
So you want to go for drinks? Like
exactly.
I'm here.
You want to talk?
May as well hate me in person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely. You get it. But I think we should probably give everybody who's not familiar with Ancient Apocalypse and Graham Hancock and all of that a quick little intro to what's going on here. I don't know about you, but I was turned on to Graham Hancock around 2020 during the pandemic, because what else do you do when you work a boring desk job is you listen to Joe Rogan ad nauseum. And eventually I came across Graham Hancock. He tickled that history part of my brain. This is long before this whole thing existed. But yeah, he basically has been, since I think 1995 is when Fingerprints of the Gods was published. He's been pushing this hypothesis, I'll call it, that there was a pre-flood, antediluvian is the term, civilization. And this has ranged from, something along the lines of early Bronze Age society, which is kind of where I sit. Like, if this existed, it probably was an early Bronze Age society, like, level, up through the people who say that they had flying cars. Graham, to me, seems to fall more on my side of things. But he does definitely, like, I think he gets wrapped up with ancient aliens a lot, too, which, in my opinion,
if I may add a little piece in there,
go for
Aiden, context, which I think would be useful. So Hancock doesn't actually mention this in his series, but in his books, he mentions that he believes that this civilization was at the technological development of pre-industrial England.
So
I didn't know
that's something that
he doesn't.
I haven't read
yeah,
books.
so so I don't know. I do wonder if he didn't mention that in his most recent series because he no longer believes that, or if because he thought that it was a little bit too extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's just an important piece to put out there because it's not mentioned in his documentary. Anyway, as you were.
Yeah, that's a good addition. So for me, I found it interesting because when the evidence he presents, while I don't think it supports the conclusion that there was a near industrial age society, I think he does make a compelling case that the sea level rose significantly, and that when we start to find stuff like Gobekli Tepe out in Turkey, that does start to rewrite the narrative a little bit. So I'm curious as to your opinions on Gobekli Tepe. I think it's the best place to start because it's his most rational point, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What we look at here is, and I'm not sure, he says that it was deliberately covered over. I'm not sure what the archaeological opinion on that is. But it's essentially a ritual site that appears to be aligned with the position of the North Star across about 1,000 years. And it was built around 11,600 AD. Now, all archaeological knowledge, as far as I learned in a history program, dates agriculture to 8,000 BC at the earliest. 10,000 years ago. So for something to be built 9600 BC, it turns the clock back a little bit. So when it comes to, somebody who's formally classically educated in archaeology, what's your opinion on that as far as, could a megalithic structure have been built pre-agriculture? And if it was, then why is this the only one we found?
Well, that's a phenomenal question, and I think that one of the most important things that I think we need to address right off the bat is the idea that there is no argument that Gobekli Tepe has completely rewritten the way that archaeologists view human history. I think that throughout a lot of Hancock series, he talks about, it's like this is making archaeologists challenge the way that they think, and they don't like that. But in reality, the discovery of this site has very radically shifted the way that we think. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the topic, previously there has been a very recognized correlation between the rise of agriculture and the development of megalithic sites. This is hypothesized to be due to the fact that when people are in the same place and they are, producing their own food and not needing to travel for it, they have a lot more time and energy to spend on these large-scale projects, which functionally don't serve any survival purpose. So seeing a site of this scale that requires this much energy before having that readily available food source is something which is very unusual in the archaeological record. So it has changed the way that we think. However, there has been no reluctancy by the archaeological community to accept this into the fold. Obviously, it challenges the way that we think, but reluctancy has not been met with. Now, another part of this, which I believe is interesting, Aiden, you mentioned like this is an outlier, like there's kind of like a one-off sort of thing. But as we talked about before we were starting the stream here, this is just the first, I think is a better way to put it. As Hancock talks about in his series, Karahan Tepe, which is another archaeological site very similar to Gobekli Tepe, which dates back even farther. I believe it's dated to about 12,500 years old. So a site dating back another 1,000 years from the already ancient Gobekli Tepe site is, making us push this date even farther and farther back. And the thing that I believe is probably the most interesting about this is the fact that, as Aiden, you pointed out, there is no evidence for agriculture at this point. Even the hills and lands surrounding Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe don't have any evidence of like workers' communities or farmland, at least that has been discovered yet. That could be something that is shown in the future, but as of right now, we don't have evidence for that. And so it is fully believed, as the evidence stands right now, that this site was built by people who were functionally hunter-gatherers. And I do think we need to temper ourselves when we talk about that term, because when I say hunter-gatherers, I'm sure many of your minds wander to, it's like they were primitive, they couldn't really accomplish anything.
Right.
But we also have to keep in mind that this was people just over 10,000 years ago. And while that is a very long time in human development and technological history, it's really not all that far as what we are functionally capable of. So these people would have been just as capable of lifting rocks up as the people who built the pyramids. And the only difference was just whether or not they planted their crops or harvested them from the fields nearby. So I do think it's a really unique site, and it's one that I think we're going to be continuing to learn a lot about. Oh, and the last thing, which I guess I just remembered that you mentioned, is the idea of an intentional burial. Now, that's Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe are actually going to be two sites which I discuss in my upcoming episode analyzing ancient apocalypse. I haven't covered them yet. But in that, he postulates that it was intentionally buried as some sort of time capsule to warn us of the cataclysm that's coming. There is currently no evidence that this site was intentionally buried. In fact, quite the opposite. It is believed that this is just a site that was sort of filled in over time. I mean, it's 12,800 years old. Something that has been sitting on a hilltop for that amount of time would have pretty rapidly changed. And another factor on top of that is the idea that the environment it is in has shifted a lot. Over the course of the past 12,000 years, the Earth's climate has shifted. We always hear about the Fertile Crescent and, think about Mesopotamia, but it's in a desert now. It's not the Fertile Crescent anymore. So we have to remind ourselves that the environments and the lands that these sites have changed over the past, 12,000 years.
So what you're saying is there was a mud flood that covered up an ancient globe-spanning empire, right? Okay.
That's the only rational explanation, Aiden.
I'm glad we're on the same page. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's definitely something that I've been curious about. It has been the opinion of archaeologists in general regarding Gobekli Tepe and things like that, because when I mentioned this on TikTok in mid 2021, and I will admit I go back and I look at those videos and I'm like, I probably could have checked my facts a little bit harder there. I did take Graham Hancock a little bit too much as his word. But I had a couple of archaeology accounts come after me really hard. Like one guy lost like a few I think it was like 10,000 followers because he was shitting on me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Now I think it was more because he
lesson
decided
learned.
to make
I'm
a
not
9-minute.
publicly
He made like a
acting.
9-minute TikTok rant and got drunk while he did
Oh,
it.
shit.
Yeah, I'll tell you who that was after the stream, but it did not go
Yeah,
well
for
for
sure.
him.
No, it doesn't
But
sound like it.
looking back, like, you know, okay, I definitely I said a few things that probably were maybe half correct. But, you know, looking back at it and you look at what Graham is saying, I think that I think he's one of those guys, like we talk about David Paulides all the time with the missing 411 phenomenon, where you've got these people who they become like the biggest name in their field. And it seems like they have to push the most extreme version of whatever they're talking about in order for them to get people to actually care. You know, we found this with Aaron Hedges from the Missing 411 phenomenon. We're doing a video on him that's going to release this Friday. And there are a bunch of details left out of that story that definitely make it seem a lot less paranormal and a lot more this guy was recovering from alcoholism and possibly also on benzodiazepines. So, you know, I wonder how much that gets involved with Graham Hancock's stuff. But when you go to the root of what he's talking about with, you know, Gobekli Tepe being that old and this having to rewrite things, it was definitely surprising to me to hear you say that archaeology is not pushing back against it. And maybe that is because I do follow the guy on Twitter, I will be honest. And when Ancient Apocalypse hit Netflix, when it was announced, there were articles in The Guardian and in all sorts of other media, blog posts from experts and things like that, basically talking about how this shouldn't be allowed on TV and this is dangerous. And, you know, the show hadn't come out yet. I don't know if they were allowed to see advanced screenings of it, but when I watched the show, there were a few things that I was like, whatever, that seems a little shaky. But none of it came across as dangerous. So I guess I'm curious, in your opinion, like, were those hyperbolic, people going and calling it dangerous, or do you think that this is, you know, something that was kind of blown out of proportion, or do you think that was legitimate fear?
That's a really interesting question. I think that the using the word dangerous, I think, is very loaded because there's many things that can imply. Like, what sort of danger? You know, it's a very broad term. But as far as this show goes, I can't speak for whether or not these people had early access to it. If they are speaking about it before it came out, I mean, that is up to, you know, whether or not you think that they should just be assuming what the content is going to be or whatnot. But as far as labeling the show as dangerous, I don't know if I would go that far, but what I would say is I have labeled the show, and I continue to, I think that it could be classed as predatory. Because the way that it works is it is a sensationalized form of media that works to capitalize on the curiosity that everyone has, but also works to undermine the scientific processes that actually inform those interests. And so by doing that, it honestly works a lot more to undermine the actual scientific theory and expertise that goes into understanding these sites, and a lot less to actually inform further. Now, on the surface level, you're like, there are plenty of sites that you have probably only heard about for the first time by watching Ancient Apocalypse. And the same is for me. I'm a trained archaeologist, and it was the first time that I watched, you know, a series that talked about Gunung Padang, or, you know, some of these other sites that are a lot less talked about. And because of that, I do have some appreciation for the fact that they're able to bring those things into the limelight. But when you think about it, you learn a lot less about the sites themselves, and more you learn that they exist, and then sort of Hancock's theory about them. So it becomes a lot less of a, like, here's this really unique site, now let me tell you all about it, and more of a, here's this really unique site, and now the archaeologists are trying to lie to you, and here's the truth about it. So by doing that, I think that Hancock has a very I don't know if malicious is the right word, because I do think that Hancock does genuinely believe in the things that he's saying. But the way that he does it is structured in such a way that throughout the course of the series, not only does the theory get a little bit more outlandish, but also his attempt to vilify mainstream archaeology becomes more and more apparent as the episodes go on. His first episode, I was actually a really big fan of. It was the first time I'd heard of Gunung Padang. I was like, this is really
very
neat.
interesting site.
It is. It's really cool. You know, there's obviously some errors with it where, you know, he talks about the idea that it could be 25,000 years old and that there was a sample dated. He doesn't reference how it was sampled, what was actually sampled. I talk about this in my video, Aiden, but to recap for you, he claims that this site could be 25,000 years old or something like that because of a date that was taken from underneath it. Now, it's very possible that a 25,000-year-old date was obtained, and I don't doubt it was, but as you are probably well aware, it was probably a radiocarbon date, and that can be done using any natural material, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they found a cultural layer. And even if they did find a cultural layer, it doesn't mean that it is associated with the site which is now built on top of it. That's something that we see in all kinds of places that have seen human habitation for long periods of time, is if someone built a campfire on the ground, thousands of years later, someone else probably also thought that was a pretty good spot and built their, temple there.
Right.
So I think that there are some errors like that. But in that first episode, I was kind of like optimistic. I was like, this is pretty good. However, we get to episode 4 where he talks about the Bimini Road, which isn't even an archaeological site. I talk about that in my most recent episode that came out. And throughout the course of it, he uses this language that really works to just try and make you, it works to make an other. And an other in this case being, mainstream archaeology and, the academic community. Because it makes it a lot more palatable to believe in the things Hancock is saying if he says that all of those who disagree with him are wrong and they are trying to lie to you. And then you're kind of like, well, I don't want to be one of them. And so then by the time the series ends, you're kind of like, well, I mean, he gave me like enough info. And also he ends with the final episode just talking about the Younger Dryas impact, which doesn't have any, I mean, his theory is not that there was a Younger Dryas impact. That's a whole thing separately. But because he ends with something that has scientific basis, the last taste in your mouth is, well, look, the scientists actually have supported it. And so then he can kind of end on that note. So I don't know if I would go so far as to call it dangerous. I think that in some contexts, I would agree that it is. But predatory, I think, is the word that I would use more.
All right. Yeah. And I would love to, I'd love to get your thoughts on some things about that, because with Bimini Road, that's one of the few things he's brought up that I've looked at it and been like, all right, I see where he's coming from, but what's the point? And it does appear on the Piri Reis map, which is a little odd. At least a suggestion of it does. And, considering the time period, we just looked at a whole bunch of really old maps for our video on Roanoke. They're not particularly accurate. They are astonishingly accurate for the time, but they're not particularly accurate. It's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, damn, that was really good for what they had available, but it does not stand up to modern scrutiny. So Bimini Road, to me, when I look at it, I'll admit it does very much look like it's man-made. And it is not that deep. So I'm curious what the archaeological reason to say that's not anthropological is. Yeah.
Excellent question. Firstly, something that I want to just revisit real quick is you mentioned that the Bimini Road is present on the Piri Reis map. This is something which I talked about in my most recent episode. But the Piri Reis map is one which is used for multiple theories. Not only is it used for the idea of, this lost Bimini Island, but also, an ice-free Antarctica. It's pretty much been used for anything that someone could point at it for.
The ice-free Antarctica one is really weird, because at no point does it suggest that Antarctica is ice-free. It just suggests it's there.
Yeah, and also at the point of Antarctica, there's a little piece of writing on it which says the part with all the snakes, which to me sounds more like South America than Antarctica.
Yeah,
but
that was one thing. If you look at it, it very much does look like he just drew Antarctica out to the, or not Antarctica, as far as South America out to the right a little bit.
Yeah. And that's part of what makes it so interesting. So with all of the sort of, the old world is all sort of north-south orientation, but with the new world, it's a little bit changed, where South America curves to the south, and North America, the north actually faces to the west. And because of that, it has actually positioned the island of Puerto Rico as being exactly where the Bimini Road is. Now, I'm sure that you guys, when doing your research on the Roanoke Islands, you probably saw maps that showed roads on them. But I would be willing to bet that none of them showed the texture of the blocks that the road was made out of.
No.
Which brings me to my theory, which is that what the Piri Reis map is showing is the island of Puerto Rico with its mountain chain running down the middle of it. Puerto Rico is a very mountainous island, and this is an old map showing topography. It would be the most recognizable feature of an island of this size. So when Hancock uses that claim, I personally thought it was incredibly foolish, because not only is this map far too zoomed out to show a road, but also why would that be the only thing which is shown of the lost civilization of Atlantis? I feel like if I was trying to mark that on a map, I'd probably put something a little bit more grand.
To his credit, he does very explicitly say, "I'm not saying Bimini Road is the lost city of Atlantis." I do want to give him credit there.
Yes.
He does not say. But
And I
yeah.
appreciate you pointing that out. But the thing that he is implying, and while I do appreciate him making those claims, the thing that he is implying is that this is part of some lost like superstructure. Essentially, a road of this
Mhm.
size would be leading to something pretty significant. Which brings us to the next point of why it's not anthropologically associated, because there's nothing else around it. A road
Yeah.
of this size would be leading to, if this had been an island that is now sunken, this part which is still sticking up would be the highest point of the island. So you'd expect to find,
Right.
well, pretty much anything there. He does point to a zoomorphic mound, a shell midden in the shape of a shark, which is associated with the indigenous people of the area. But I would be, when in my video, I talked about this, and I think that it would be, the people who have the technological ability to build a road of this size and scale, the only other thing they would leave behind wouldn't be a pile of shells in
Yeah.
the shape of a shark.
Right.
And that's not to say that that doesn't take, technological advancement and cultural development, but they're just working on two different levels of scale and scope. And so, as far as the rock itself, he very quickly at the beginning of the episode is like, scientists will tell you it's beach rock, but it's not. And he never actually goes on to define what beach rock is. He doesn't talk about it really at all. But beach rock is, in a calcium carbonate-rich water of a tropical environment, it will work to weld the sand grains together through tidal action, and that's what makes beach rock. And because of this, we can identify layers of sediment that have been pretty much concreted to create this beach rock. And in the Bimini Road, through core samples, they've been able to see that the like layers of sand continue between the different blocks. So what you're looking at, instead of being multiple stones that have been rearranged, is one large slab that at one point cracked and broke and has slowly eroded into these multiple long rectangular slabs. Furthermore, in other places where there are beach rock, which happens through all sorts of tropical environments, we see similar patterns where rock of this composition will break when exposed to the right conditions and create these about 10 to 15-foot long rectangular slabs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's definitely a sensible explanation for the shark. Absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as the Bimini Road part goes, one thing he points out are the stones underneath it that appear to be propping it up so that it's level.
What, kind of like a subgrade?
What?
Kind of like a subgrade?
If I knew what that term meant, I could give you an appropriate answer.
Okay, so subgrade is essentially what they put underneath modern roadways that is essentially made out of gravel and other small loose material that they compact before putting the road surface
so
down.
it's not quite that sophisticated. It's
Okay.
more like they took a number of smaller rocks and wedged the large rocks up under them.
Got it.
But that does appear to suggest human activity to me. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that part.
And that's a great point. And I do think that that's a lot of the reason why people will associate this site with some sort of human activity. And I'm actually really glad you brought this up because it's something which I actually didn't go into in my video. So here's a little exclusive content. So, when you think about think of the environment where the Bimini Road has sort of arisen. It's in a tropical environment. It is formed by the composite pressure of the water and the binding through the calcium carbonate which is in it. And through this tidal action, it is constantly moving sand. Now, when these massive slabs of stone are slowly eroded into the water, they are going to sink as that very fine sand is washed out from underneath them. But as this sand is washed out from underneath them, larger pieces of stone are going to be left behind, especially because they now have the pressure of this enormous slab of rock on top of them. So another thing that you have to keep in mind here is that this environment has been subject to stone creation like this since time immemorial. It has been creating beach rock, which has come out of the water, cracked, broke, eroded, fallen away, and turned into, sand again, or just these small pebbles. So the strata of this area is made out of fragments of this very rock. And so because of that, I think that to assume that there wouldn't be stones underneath a slab of this size would be to ignore the geologic history of this area. So while those sort of bowling ball shaped rocks that he points out are stuck underneath those stones, the reason that those are stuck under there is purely because all of the sand that is around them has been washed away, and those things are now pressed between a rock and a hard place, and they can't get washed any farther. And so to me, while it does look like sort of that substrate as Aiden Mark II pointed out, I think that it suggests more of just sort of the geologic history of the area and only further goes on to support the idea that this is a slab of beach rock.
So This is one thing I do feel I have to press you on. Sorry, but
Please, no, press away.
It is the one part that I was really like, okay, yeah, you're really, I'm lost on it. Because my way of doing things is I always try to disprove my opinion. So if
Dude,
I go
Aiden,
into
that's
this,
what I'm here for, man.
okay.
Bring it.
If I go into this and I'm like, man, there's got to be a rational there's no way there's a rational explanation. I try to find it. That's how I do my research.
Absolutely, as you
these
should.
These stones really are like, if you look at them, and I mean, maybe I can pull them up for you. If you want.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I probably can. If you want to, we obviously can't switch sides.
Yeah,
here,
if
but,
I had my laptop in front of me,
let's,
I would search it. But if you can pop some of them to me, I'll have a look.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pop them up on the stream if you've got that loaded up.
If you share through,
I am gonna do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've got the stream up, if you can see it, then I'm gonna try and not cover your.
I'm
face.
rolling with just my phone here at the moment, so I may need it on the It
is on the stream right now. So if you look at it, there's what six oh boy, where'd you go? There you are.
Oh boy, I'm back.
Bring
I'm
it
back.
into the call so he can see it.
What? I'm not bringing it to the call.
Yeah.
I'm putting it on the screen so the people who are watching can see it.
Yeah, what I'm saying is if you make it full screen over there, you can bring it to the call. Everybody can see it.
If I make it full screen.
Whoa!
What? If I do what?
Make this tab full screen over there, and then share your screen in Discord.
We're learning.
Yes.
Fancy. Damn.
This
is some advanced shit.
Is this gonna let us do this?
Whoa!
Whoa!
And then full screen here.
Son of a bitch.
Oh.
This is awesome.
All right. And it says swap your application to continue.
Awesome.
So
okay.
Okay. So is it up now? Can you guys see it? Okay. Cool.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. So I'm looking at a bunch of these. It's really primarily this one, and the ones like it. Those do look very much like sculpted pieces of stone that are sitting, and I am not saying this to tell you that you're wrong. I am genuinely curious as to how this happens. But if you look at it, oh my god, oh wow, that's even different. Oh my gosh, these to me, especially when you look at it and you see that there's and ignore this thing over here. I don't know what that is, but if you look at some of these pictures of what is actually Bimini Road, this one particularly, it does look like there's just open sand on the other two sides.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, how does the beach rock example work with that?
That's a phenomenal question. So I think that I want to bring you back to the beginning of this question you asked, because you used my favorite combination of words of all time, which is that it looks like.
Yeah.
And that's something that is a hallmark of a lot of the sort of arguments that I kind of go toe-to-toe with throughout my series, where something looks like something else, and therefore that is enough evidence to prove that it is the other thing. If I can totally agree with you. It looks like a road. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
But when you have to take into account more of the actual like structural environment where something like this would form. Now, it is a very good point. You point out that there's this very straight horizontal line that is between the sand and the rocks themselves. That is a very like sort of unusual looking feature to see in nature. But anyone who tells you that like straight lines as a whole won't appear is lying to you. I'm sure you could probably look at, I obviously I don't have the access to pull the images up here, but you've seen, coastal areas that have been eroded where you can see the shear of the rock. And in an environment like this, where you're creating a sandstone that is welded together with calcium carbonate, you're going to have that water erosion. And if you have a slab which has been pushed out of the water through whatever forces, and you have one side of it that is constantly being washed, when it does eventually drop down into the water, it's going to leave behind that very soft side in the sand. Now, another piece here that I think is also worth noting is the fact that it is a pretty close-up angle, so I can't really tell much of the context around it. So this is mostly me sort of postulating a theory. So this is an unresearched sort of, geologist interpretation here. But yeah, and you are right. Those rectangular slabs do look very man-made. If you want to pull up another image there, yeah. So another thing, I guess, that's worth noting is you see this this sort of slope that it follows as it goes down and follows the topography. Now through that slope, I know I mentioned to you guys that there is sort of a gradient where the sand grains sort of proceed downwards. Throughout all of those stones, as they proceed down towards the deeper water, strata of rock remains consistent, as if it were, sand falling off into deeper water. So, even though it does look like, a road going up a hill, it is really just rocks that have fallen onto the bottom of a sloping piece of water, or I guess body of water.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take it. I'll consider it. It does lead me into another question, though, and this is something that that was brought up specifically by one of my mods, because we were having a discussion about this. The sea level rise that Graham Hancock mentions is one of the most important things about all this. I looked into it. I read some graphs. I am no scientist, but I can read a graph. And I can ask Google to do math for me. So what I found was that according to there's of course the Younger Dryas and Meltwater Pulse 1b and all of this, there's the impact theory for the Younger Dryas, which does seem pretty compelling, that there was a comet impact 12,800 years ago. That one, to my understanding, is not really debated anymore. There's a KT boundary, it looks the same way as the meteor impact that killed the dinosaurs. So that one, to my understanding, that was 2007. That's kind of just accepted now. And then I went to Penn State, and I found something from Penn State. Their article suggests that sea levels have risen about 130 meters, which for those who use freedom units is 426 feet, in the last 20,000 years, and that between 15,000 and 14,000 years ago, Meltwater Pulse 1A, that went up by about 20 meters. About 20 meters of that 130 is during that period. And then 11,600 years ago, we get Meltwater Pulse 1B. And
the big one.
Yeah, the big one. And that raises sea levels from about 80 meters below where they are today down to about 20 below where they are today. So that's over the course of about 1,000 years. With, and of course I've seen people online who are like, they'll take that Younger Dryas and that end date and Meltwater Pulse 1b and say, oh, well, if you average out all of the sea level rise between Meltwater Pulse 1b and today, then it's a very small amount. It's a very small number. But if you look at the graph of sea level rise as they used, this one that I looked at used coral samples, it used the sea level of Barbados, Greenland ice cores, and then one other thing that I can't totally recall. But what it suggested was that, and that was the wrong page. What it suggested was that during the Younger Dryas period, 20 meters of that remaining sea level rise occurred during the first 500 years. And if I went through the ice cores again, and what that suggested was that there was a rise of about 60 meters during the Meltwater Pulse 1b, with about 25 of those meters occurring in just a few decades to a century, which would have been about 25 centimeters of sea level rise per year before it slows considerably. And that came from On the Hemisphere Origins of Meltwater Pulse 1a by William Richard Peltier of the University of Toronto, and that was published in Quaternary Science Reviews 2005. So unless I am misreading the graph, it suggests to me that there was a very large sea level rise event that was then followed by a much more gradual continuing sea level rise until you get closer to where we are today, around 6,000 years ago, 6,000 BC. So.
Yes. Yeah, no, Aiden, you're spot on. Again, this is one of those things where it's like the Younger Dryas is one of those things that it is a very well researched part of our climatic history, and so there's a ton of information on it. If I may, add a couple extra pieces. Oh, sweet, there we go. I can't remember all the numbers exactly off the top of my head. I know you have your paper there, but in my video, I talk about that as well, because something that is pivotal to Hancock's hypothesis is this idea of rapid sea level rise. He describes it almost as if it was these places were washed away by the monsoon floods and stuff like that. And I think that we need to temper ourselves and think about the rapidity at which this event happened. In some of my research on this, which I talk about in my video, at the maximum during the Meltwater Pulse 1b, sea levels were rising at about 1.4 inches per year, which I think puts it into a lot more perspective as far as what we could perceive on a human lifespan. So over the 1.4 inches in a year is a fucking lot. Like, if you live in the same place for a lifetime, you will notice that stuff is underwater by the time you are an adult. And that is, something which people around the world would have experienced. There is absolutely no doubting that. I mean, we're a species that loves to build our home in low-lying areas. And so a lot of people would have been impacted by this. Now, I think that when Hancock sort of talks about this theory, I do think that he doesn't do his due diligence in explaining, as you just did, the actual speed at which this sea level was happening. He talks about it as if it was, a biblical scale event where suddenly the waters just rose, and if you didn't make it to the top of the mountain, well, you're just sort of fucked. And so, 500 years is a long time. And if a majority of that, sea level change did happen over the course of that time, as it sounds like this paper, is confirming, you still have to keep in mind that this would be the difference of, that amount of sea level rise happening between us and like the Middle Ages. So it's a very long time, but think about how distant those people are to us. I can only trace my like ancestors back by a course of, Jesus, I don't know, maybe like 100, 200 years, 200 maybe years. Like, and after that, it's like I am, I'm in over my head. So, it is very true that these people would have experienced a rapid environmental change of this size and scale. But I think it's important that we temper really the perception that people would have had of this event as it was occurring.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, when I look at that number, and I think back to the Bronze Age collapse, and the fact that we had. 1177 is kind of the year that it all completely falls apart, if you follow the same scholars I do. But if you look at, the process, it took about 100 years for the Bronze Age civilizations to realize they were in trouble, go through that trouble, and then you see basically every empire except for Egypt collapses completely. And if you think about the level of technology we had then, and where our cities were built, I wonder if, dial it back a few thousand years, and Egypt is undergoing situations where if they build too close to the Nile, they get set back a dozen years because they've just been completely wiped away. So when you look at the Graham Hancock argument at its core, what it really is the same one I make a lot of the time, which is there is enough evidence that we could suggest that maybe back 11,600 years and earlier, there was a beginnings of a civilization. Maybe not Mycenaean Greece, maybe not Middle Kingdom Egypt, but something that started to resemble those, Sumer. I wonder, had they built on the coastlines, if these were people who had built, where Phoenicia stood, or I guess 50 miles west of where Phoenicia stood, do you think there's a possibility that we were actually getting ahead, that we were getting to the point of, maybe we're like with Gobekli Tepe, where there's not quite writing, but there's pictographs. Do you think that we were maybe at the point where we were just about to get there? Is there any possibility that we could have been pushed back by those rising sea levels, that maybe they wouldn't have wiped out civilization? It would have been a massive cataclysmic flood where everybody died, but they were getting swallowed up year after year, and they were still so early into the process of agriculture that maybe they couldn't move appropriately?
I would say that is a hypothesis that I would absolutely think there is foundation to. Because, again, as we've talked about before, like, humans love to live along the shore. That's just the thing that we like to do. And so I think that having, this sea level rise probably wouldn't have been, the cataclysmic event as it's sort of postulated in Ancient Apocalypse, but, it would be more of like, well, damn it, now everything is underwater, so we just have to keep moving that way. And like, you up everything and you just keep going inland. And all of these sites that would have been built along the water while the sea level was fairly consistent would have been covered eventually. It wouldn't have been over the course of an afternoon or a year. It would have been over the course of, 500 to 1,000 years before it's all actually underwater. And that's actually a topic that I'm really interested in, and I talk about a little bit in my analysis of Ancient Apocalypse, because underwater archaeology is, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of archaeology, and is something that is not done nearly enough. So I'm from, I went to school up in Maine, and so because of that, I'm pretty familiar with the archaeological sites up there. And there's this great site called Blue Hill Bay off of Acadia National Park, where they found these two underwater hills that have evidence of paleo-indigenous activity, and they're both completely sunken. They found bifaces, they found tools, they found all kinds of stuff there. There's another one, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's another island, was an island farther off of Maine, and now it's a seamount, but they have done archaeological excavations on it and have found evidence that indigenous people would row their like canoes out to the island and go caribou hunting back when caribou still lived down here. And so they have like, they found fire pits, they found the tools, they found kill sites on, what is now a seamount. And so I think that that's a really important part of our history that has been lost. And honestly, it was my favorite part of Hancock's series, because he actually brings attention to the fact that our underwater archaeology holds the keys to our oldest evidence of civilization. And you can postulate this even farther back. Look at the Sahara. The Sahara used to be green, as I'm sure you are aware, and it used to be a lush jungle. It used to be a grassland. It's where we got our roots. It's where we began to fucking walk on two legs and shit. And so, you look at all of these ancient, river basins, and it makes you think this place would have been lush about 6,000 years ago. So what is lost underneath the sands? What was once a river delta, but is now just, a sandy dune that leads out to the ocean? So there are parts of our history which are absolutely locked in these places which have gone through massive climatic changes. And I think, it's something that in my personal, career going forward, I would love to look into more, because I do think that even if it's not to the extent that Hancock talks about, it's something that I would meet him in the middle on and say, like, I want to know more about this, because who knows, maybe he is fucking right, but we're not going to know if we don't look down there.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, and you look at like even some of the places in the Mediterranean, there are villages that were submerged 500 to 1,000 years ago that were fully functional, and then just over time flooding just made them uninhabitable.
Yeah, there's
and
like
now
Rome in the site
20 to 50 feet under the water. In the Mediterranean. And then of course, there's Doggerland, of course, up in the area between Great Britain and Denmark. There was an entire landmass there that is now below water, and we keep finding Stone Age material that suggests this was not underwater all that long ago. Like it was definitely a while ago, but it was not 100,000, 500,000 years. It was within human existence. And I think the earliest modern Homo sapiens sapiens are dated to 300,000 years?
Yeah, about 250.
Yeah. So it's, we've been around a long time. We only really started getting to where we are at most, like the beginnings of agriculture and civilization. You can imagine we probably figured out how to domesticate animals and how to, at the very least, get grain to grow in the same spot every year. We probably were starting to see that happening like 15,000 years ago, that people were starting to look into it, because we know that by 10,000 years we're domesticating the dog. So they must have had an idea that symbiotic
dog
relationship.
Domestication going back I think 30,000 years. Dogs have been with us for fucking ever, dude. Yeah, shit's crazy.
Hell yeah.
And
Archie,
that's a really
come here. Come say hi to the street.
Come on, cameo appearance.
Come
Show
on.
us the dog.
There we
Show
go.
us the yes.
This was a wolf
Let's
at
go.
one point.
Yeah, wow.
A very, 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 very long time ago, this was a wolf.
Yeah, a ferocious beast.
Yeah. He's maintained the physical shape. Lost a lot of the size and ferocity.
I gotta say, the stance, he really has the stance down. Yeah. That's a majestic pose. Nose into the wind.
You want to give us the tail?
There
we go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's a very good boy.
The boy is a true showman.
He knew. When we said, you have to come show off, he knew the assignment.
Oh, he knew. He knew what he was doing. He's a very, very intelligent little guy sometimes.
Yeah.
Most of the time, not really. He still hasn't figured out drinking water. He's about 4 years old. We'll get there eventually.
We have our moments,
exactly.
Yeah. Water's a challenge. It's tough, Yeah.
Yeah, but okay, so I'm glad we're in agreement on that. That at the very least, this is all intriguing, and it's something that we should be looking into.
Absolutely, and honestly, one of my, I still haven't gone on to do my PhD or a master's or anything like that. So I officially haven't declared any specific part of archaeology. But the one that I'm the most interested in is, the prehistoric archaeology, anything pre 10,000 years ago, because it's something which is really close to us in the grand scheme of things, but it's still beyond that curtain of history where we don't have anything written down about it. And so it's entirely up to us to piece together all of the pieces that we have at our disposal. And I think that's part of the reason why I was so, interested in Hancock's, documentary series, not only because I knew I was going to be able to make a video about it, but because I'm like, this is, a topic that is something that I'm really interested about. And so, seeing Hancock sort of combine these things, which a prehistoric archaeologist is all over, like the idea that we need to do underwater archaeology and stuff like that, with sort of this, pseudo mystical, like they're leaving messages for us written in the stones. It's like you're so like the thing that I don't remember the exact words I used, but it was like Hancock is like he keeps being like, okay, I'm with him, I'm with him, I'm with him, I'm with him, and then he just goes fucking like completely off the charts. I'm like, whoa, you lost me at the end. Like, we need to do more underwater archaeology? Yes. Climatic environmental shift has changed the way that humans have existed throughout time? Absolutely. They left us written encoded messages in the stars so that when we go through a comet field that we will know. Okay, you lost me on that last part.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting watching him be like almost logical and then suddenly just fly off the rails at the end.
Yeah, it seems like what he's done is really taken the route of like describing what is known, and then he is trying to jump to the end and find the thing that's there. And I just don't think there's enough evidence quite yet. I think
you're spot on.
I think he's on to something. I think that these are definitely things that should be investigated, but when he tries to jump to those conclusions, I know that in order to, he's a journalist, in order to write a book, a story, a documentary, they want you to have a start and an end.
Yes.
We're not at the end yet. I don't think we're there.
You are spot on, especially at this point in history. And I think that you actually touch on something really important there, which is that Hancock has this very skewed perception, at least he seems to have this very skewed perception of what the archaeological record completion is actually like. Throughout his series, he, postulates the idea. He's like, how are we supposed to believe that people just woke up one morning and decided to build this when talking about Gobekli Tepe, Gigantea, Karahan Tepe, all these like really ancient sites that are the oldest of their kind? And I think he is doing that to sort of sensationalize it further. But I also have to wonder, like, do you really think that this is the oldest? Because it isn't. I mean, we found Gobekli Tepe, and then we found Karahan Tepe, and we're going to find something older. So what really fascinates me about the way that he thinks and the way he structures his argument is he treats his hypothesis as if we have all the information, and we don't. We have a fucking infinitesimal amount of the information. Yeah. We have so little that if you were trying to postulate this idea of a global world's, ruling civilization, you would not have enough pieces to be able to do it, even if it did exist. And so it really fascinates me to see how it's like you're so close to being like, this is a really interesting piece of history that we need to learn more about, but he's also treating it as if he has all the pieces in front of him and he's trying to put them together when he only has like, 0.001% of the pieces. And it's very unusual.
Well, it's also an interesting trajectory because, in these instances where we don't have a lot of the information, when you're asking that question of who woke up and decided to do this one day, imagine asking that about Rome or Manhattan.
Well, I mean, somebody did, and how'd it go for her?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point. But wait, real quick, while we're still on the subject of ancient apocalypse, there is one thing that, Milo, I would love for you to touch on with Aiden, which was in relation to your coverage of the Malta doorways element, because I think that was what I found most entertaining in the second episode. So I'd love for you guys to discuss that for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the doorway, the thing with knowing literally nothing else about that, it struck me as interesting, but also not entirely odd. I think the odd part is when it was built, not that it was built. But also it feels to me far less weird than looking at Gobekli Tepe, because that's 11,600 years. At Malta, it's just previously we didn't really think that there were people there, and it turns out there actually may have been.
Yeah.
So to me, that one doesn't feel that odd. It's just like, oh, well, now we have evidence that people were here earlier than we thought they were. But it's so far removed from Gobekli Tepe that we cannot feasibly be talking about the civilization.
You're absolutely right. And your intuition is spot on there, Aiden, because it definitely is a lot less of a confusing explanation than any of the other sites. So, he talks about how all of these doorways face towards the star Sirius, and that like every time Sirius would wander across the sky, they'd build a new temple. Now, first and foremost, if you are building a temple with a doorway that's big enough for a person to walk through it, how are you going to aim that doorway at a star? Like, think about if you're standing in that doorway, think about how many stars you could see through the doorway. So there's so many stars through it that I don't firmly believe that you could actually do that. I mentioned in my video, I'm like, if you have a hole that's like through the wall and like on the summer solstice, Sirius rises through it, then I'd be like, okay, that's precise enough that you can prove that it is Sirius. But when you're talking about a pinprick in the sky, that's a hard one to prove. Now, the other thing that happens in that direction, all of this doorways face to the southeast,
Yeah.
which is where the sun rises from. So I think it's a lot more likely that when you're building a stone citadel where there's like giant stone blocks on all sides and you need light inside of it, you have the doorway oriented towards the place where the sun comes up. And he also shows recreations, which I don't think that I'm not well versed in it enough, but I think he showed them as accurate as they can be, which shows the Gigantia and other temples on Malta having an open roof. So by the time the sun is up in the sky, you have sunlight shining down through the roof. But when the sun is still low on the horizon, you need some other way to be able to get light into it. And so you just have your doorway facing towards where the sun comes up, and boom. So that's like one of those things where I'm like, his theory like makes sense on paper when you just hear him talk about it. But if you take like any other like logical explanation into account, I'm like pointing at Sirius to warn us that we're going to go through a comet trail. Like, come on. I don't know. It just seems like too far of a leap.
That reasoning was a little weird. I could understand if it were facing the sun at the summer solstice. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Because obviously the sun's going to rise in much the same place every day, but you tend to kind of... Ancient cultures do this, and we look at, this, we've got this in Britain, we've got this in Mesopotamia, India, China, like Polynesia. There's people counting where the sun is all throughout history. I don't think that it necessarily implies any sort of warning about one specific event. Also, the likelihood that they would have even been able to remotely understand that. I continue to be of the belief that the origin of the story of Ragnarok in Norse paganism might come from that Younger Dryas impact. That it might
really,
because what they describe in Ragnarok, if you go into the nitty gritty of the details, obviously all of this is caused by the gods fighting each other and all that. But what they describe is that there is a global fire, that one of the giants sets the world on fire, and then that fire is quenched by a global flood. And if you think about what that might sound like, if an asteroid were to hit Greenland, that's probably exactly how it would look to people living thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So, I think we've definitely maintained a lot of these stories. And if you look at how the flood story changes based on where in the world you are in relation to that alleged comet strike, it actually does make a lot of sense. Where if you look at the details of the different stories, the further north you are, the more cataclysmic it is, the more there's an involvement of fire. Whereas the further south you are, the more it's about the flooding. So just one thing that I found interesting about that entire episode, that concept. But that does bring, I think, us to that final point that I really wanted to talk about, which is when you're looking at the ancient world and things that we don't totally understand. Obviously, we're missing a lot. I think that what Gobekli Tepe says to us is not, people decided one day to wake up and build this, but rather that we're missing the evidence of those people. That, they were up to something, they were doing something out there, but we just haven't figured it out yet. And if you look at the other Tepe sites that kind of ring around it, we probably can figure out sort of what was going on. It's gonna be a lot of digging and a long while before we find any concrete evidence that tells us something to the extent that the Clovis culture finds did. And of course now that's been dialed back. So I will say I have to agree with him on one specific point, and that stuff really does keep getting older. He says that all the time.
No, whenever you say you found the oldest thing, you have not found the oldest thing. It's horseshit.
It's just the oldest thing we're currently aware of.
Yeah, the oldest thing you have found.
I did think he made an interesting point about Darren Kuyu, but we also did a video on that, and I could find very little evidence of anybody pre-Hittite culture being there. And of course he says, well, just because the oldest cultural artifacts we have are from this, the only way I see that tunnel system being older than the Hittites is if we end up finding something else somewhere else that we're like, oh wait, this isn't a random fragment of rock, this isn't a naturally occurring formation, this is something that we found across an area that implies human activity, but we don't have that yet. So it seems that, and of course, we didn't know the Hittites were there either until sometime in the late 1800s. At first, it was thought it may have been the Phrygians, and they thought that the Bible was just kind of saying there was this group of people up there, and they didn't actually exist, or they were just another tribe of Canaanites. And of course, then it turned out that the Jews recorded that. And they were like, yeah, there's this really violent empire up there. Just avoid that.
Don't go through those mountains.
Yeah.
Take a detour.
Yeah. So they turned out to be right. But, you know, we didn't know about that. When it was first uncovered in, I think, the 1800s, that they started finding Hittite artifacts, they just thought that they were, like, Phrygian or Assyrian or something like that. Turned out it was an entire culture. And then sometimes you get a little bit more silly and goofy, and you say that the Chicago World's Fair was built by the Tartarians. So I don't know exactly how much you know about this conspiracy, but it's been brought up a number of times. And if anybody in the chat knows of someone who is a Tartaria truther that wants to come on this show and argue with me about it, I will happily do so. I have been trying. I have said it a number of times. Nobody has emailed me. The email is very public. You can find it. There's thelorelodge@gmail.com, and there is aiden.mattis@lstagency.com. Both of those will get to me. If you're a Tartaria truther who wants to speak to this show and come on here and use our platform, we will argue with you. We will happily do it. But to my understanding, this whole theory originated as the belief that there was, up until sometime in the 1800s, a very, very powerful kingdom known as Great Tartary or Grand Tartaria, depending on what country the map you're reading is from, which existed in what would today be known as Eurasia. And that sometime in the 1800s, it was destroyed, dismantled, and the entire world agreed somehow, we've never done this before for anything, the entire world agreed to not talk about it and get rid of all evidence that it existed except for where it's on all of the maps. And then it grows from there, and you'll find people are like, yes, all that's well and good, but in reality, it wasn't destroyed by empires. It was a mud flood, a global mud flood that covered everything. And then even further, there are people who will say that Tartaria was a globe-spanning empire with advanced technology, and that that's the reason we can't build anything like it anymore. You know, like, I don't know, the Roman Pantheon. You know, if only we had built something like the U.S. Capitol building, which had the exact same architectural style.
No, we can't do it. We didn't do that. That was Tartaria.
Exactly. So
come on, Aiden, get with it.
You know, I'm curious if have you encountered those people in your content, because they pop up on mine.
You know, Aiden, I'm going to be totally honest with you. The times I have encountered this has been not knowing that I'm actually encountering it. Mm-hmm. I've seen people talk about the Chicago World's Fair and like weird conspiracies around it, but I just never understood what the fuck they were talking about, because frankly, the conspiracy is so confusing that I just don't understand it. It started as some weird like Russian nationalist thing in like the 1800s about like their lost homeland or something like that, and then it slowly devolved into this idea that like, you know what, this empire existed, or like the traces of this empire were wiped away as recently as like the 1960s, right?
Yep.
Or allegedly.
There's 1960s, there's 1890s, there's 1850s. They can't even decide. They can't even agree on when it disappeared.
So am I understanding this correctly? Where, like, is Putin invading Ukraine to revitalize the Tartarian Empire? Is that what I'm hearing?
You know what? If that was Putin's aim, I would respect it a lot more.
Like, yeah, fucking go for it.
You know what? At least that is a legitimate piece of psychosis. Instead of just
that's
we
a
want
good
these
reason
two
to
regions.
institutionalize someone. The closest I have strayed into that quagmire is the mud flood theory. So actually, my very first video on YouTube was about a guy who was doing a whole mud flood thing, and I went through it and I broke down all his points. And I think the reason that video honestly was kind of an inspiration for me to kind of like stray away from, I guess, what can only be described as just the fucking batshit insane conspiracies, where it's like there's not even like any evidence for this. Like, it's just saying something, and then because you're saying it, it's true. Like, one thing I will give Hancock day in and day out, whether or not I agree with him, he made a whole ass series trying to back up his claim. And he had evidence, even if I can, you know, fight it. He's like, he gave evidence. He's written books on it. Like, this guy believes what he believes, and he's actually trying to prove it. And I have a lot of respect for that, because that's the way science works, is you challenge each other. That's the whole point of it. But then you get people who do this weird mud flood shit where they're like, why are all these buildings in San Francisco built on a hill? Like, humans have never built on hills. This is what the guy said in the video that I reviewed. And I was like, I literally live like 10 minutes away from a hill that's yeah, like I literally live like next to a hill that's so steep that I would walk my fucking bike up as a kid because like I just couldn't get up it. It's so goddamn steep. And it's like there's houses built all the way up it. Were these Tartarians or was this just some dude outside of Boston who was like, yeah, I'm gonna build a house on here? Yep. Like it makes literally no sense. And it's to the point where it's like, do I even waste my breath trying to debunk this? Because it's just insane. And anyone who believes it is clearly not going to take any evidence because the evidence is all around you.
Yep. And you get into stuff like we just figured out how to do Roman concrete again. Like, like yeah, there's lost technologies that it took us a while to figure out. Now, was our concrete worse than Roman concrete? Not really necessarily. We were doing just fine with it. But it's cool that we figured that one out. That we were like, that's how they did this 2,000 years ago. But when you get into and what strikes me with these people often is how intense their detest for academia is. Like, I am by no means the biggest fan of the ivory tower and academia and all that. I think I've experienced enough in my own life with professors and deans and all of that to kind of look at it and be like, all right, you guys need to get off your asses and get in the field because you haven't been there in long enough. You don't know what's going on. But at the same time, there's, they'll say, oh, well, you had a college education in history. You don't actually know. I'm sitting here, I'm like, do you know what I did? Do you have any idea what a university degree in history is? Because they seem to think that it's like a professor standing up there at the front of the room saying, and this happened, and then this happened, and you're just taking notes, just memorizing. And I'm like, no, I read the primary source documents myself. Like, when I was studying to do my term paper on the Rebellion of Owen Glendower, I sat there and I
never even heard of that.
Yeah, I know, that's a granular little one, isn't it? The dude's super cool. He's a super cool dude. But, I sat there and I read through the Chronicle of Adam of Usk and the Chronicle of Enguerrand de Montrelet and the Chronicle of Thomas Walsingham. Like, I sat there and I read through these that were written in the early 1400s when all of this happened. I didn't just listen to my professor say stuff. Like, and that's the same thing archaeologists do to a large extent. I will say there have been times where I've felt like there have been people just trying to shut down conversation. But at the same time, like I do know archaeologists and I know what they do in the field and I know that it's hard work. A lot of it is very underpaid, digging in the ground, trying to understand things that happened so long ago that most people don't care. Also that a guy like me can look at it and go, can you explain this? Like,
fuck you, Aiden.
No.
Absolutely not.
So I don't understand the, if it's just a professor who's standing there going, yeah, no, that didn't happen. I get it that you're like, that's not really convincing. But when, the video I've gotten the most pushback from the Tartaria people on was originally a TikTok. It was a Stitch. And basically some guy whose whole thing, he's not trying to convince anybody that anything happened. He's just, saying, and there's people that believe this. He's sitting there, he's talking about Tartaria and all the maps and that. And I made a video and I basically went, yeah, this is because the map, the term for Eurasia used to be Tartaria. Like, that we didn't have the term Eurasia yet. The people that lived on the edge of European knowledge called themselves the Tatars. So they called the whole area Tartaria. It wasn't that there was an empire there. And if you look at the maps, it's kind of funny because what is considered Tartary keeps getting pushed further and further east as they discover what these tribes actually call themselves. So by the end of it, like, they're like, yeah, so Mongolia's here and this is all part of Russia now. China's over here. And most of it's just the old Russian Empire. What people don't seem to know is that the Russians did not actually expand into that territory until the 1800s. Like, the point at which they actually established it.
I think I have a theory. So, how you say it keeps getting pushed farther and farther to like the northeast as time goes on. Well, the very last place where mastodons or mammoths existed was on a little island in Siberia about 4,000 years ago. I think the Tartars were mastodons. And it's eventually going to get pushed to that one island, and that's going to be the ones, and they're the ones who did the Chicago World's Fair. Mud flood. Right.
Okay, that explains it.
I'm
not. How do you explain the lack of mammoths in Chicago in 1892?
Listen, I'm not here for your lips, son.
That's how I see it going. If anybody comes on the show to argue for Tartaria.
You know, and you bring up a really good point talking about the the idea of the sort of academic like hive mind, I guess, because it is something which I have noticed to be such a constant when talking about conspiracies, and it is this idea of trying to, I guess it really is a distrust in sort of science and sort of the mainstream viewpoint. And obviously, I think all viewpoints need to be challenged, especially the mainstream one. I mean, fucking 500 years ago, we thought the world revolved, the sun revolved around the earth. Like, question that,
Yeah.
That's the only reason we're here now. But something that I think is really interesting about it is just the how many arguments I have gotten on my videos talking about Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse that I have not gotten a single argument really talking about any of the actual points. They're just like, you are a mainstream archaeologist, you're one of the people, like I literally got one that was like, you're one of the people he warned us about. And I'm like, I am the mainstream archaeologist, the prophecies foretold, like what the fuck? And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you're not like engaging in conversation. It's just this idea that like they are lying to you. And I had this one where there was this conspiracy that I was doing on TikTok where there was a woman who thought the sun wasn't real, which was interesting. And her whole thing was like, she was talking about like the speed of light and like how confusing it is. And I remember very vividly the word she used was, they just are telling you all this to try and confuse you. And I was like, you just had a really bad science teacher. Like, that completely changed my like view of it. And I was like, fuck, like you just had someone who made you feel shitty about learning. And that's something which I see as like, Hancock comes in here and he preaches this whole thing of like, all those people who like, gave you like a D- in English or like, a D- in social studies, like, well, they were all lying to you and I'm the one that's right. And so it draws all these people in because they feel accepted by this person. And by vilifying all the ones who made them feel pain in the past, he's like, I am your Messiah.
Right.
And so it draws this huge crowd in. And it's really unusual to watch, but I mean, I guess it makes perfect sense. It's just a psychology thing, Everyone only wants one thing, and that's to feel accepted. And so I guess if you can capitalize on that, it works.
Yeah, there's some people out there that need some direction.
I could not have said it better.
That's probably the best way to put it.
Eloquently well put.
But with that said, I think it is probably a good time to go over to question time. So for those who are not regulars of the stream, because I noticed that number is a little higher than usual, the way we typically do Q&A is that we answer super chats first. We'll then have him go through and scroll through regular chats. The reason we do super chats first is because it helps fund the show and because, those people put their money up, so they at least deserve to have an answer to their question. So we'll be going through those. Aiden, would you like to take us off?
Sure, yeah. And just the structure of this, we're doing similar to the last time we did it on Weird Bible, which is just going to be, we're going through the most relevant ones to this discussion first, and then we will filter down through things that are a little bit less relevant. So,
perfect.
First one in that regard is from Jim Slater for £2, and says, do you think Graham Hancock is bitter that he never got accepted? That's a little vague, but I'm curious if you guys can decipher what that means a little bit more in detail.
I'm curious about your thoughts on that, actually.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I think that, my thoughts on it, I think this actually ties perfectly in with what I was just talking about, where it's the idea of feeling like you are not accepted that makes you want to fight back against, the mainstream. And so I definitely think that there is some part of Hancock that is bitter about that. I don't know if that's his primary motivation for doing this. In fact, I doubt it is because I do think he genuinely believes in this. But absolutely. And I think part of my reason for believing that, to give a little bit more credence to it, is, he talks a lot about, what archaeologists think. And a lot of the ideas that he brings up are things that haven't actually been thought in the last, 40 years. Like, this idea that, hunter-gatherers were primitive. Like, that was a way that people thought when, maybe, he was in school or, our parents were in school. But, any archaeologist you talk to today would never tell you that, hunter-gatherers were primitive. And so I do definitely think that he, experienced a lot of scorn from that community. And I don't blame him for holding that sort of resentment. But I definitely think that that does fuel his fire quite a bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That I think that at this point, a lot of what drives him to keep going, because the guy's in his 70s, he's already written his books, he's made his appearances. Like,
I did not realize he was that old.
Oh yeah, he's an old
dude. No,
dude's
he's fucking still kicking. I got to give him.
I have to respect it. Yeah,
stop.
Yeah, and I on the one hand, like, yeah, there's perhaps he feels like he's got more to give, but on the other, I do think that a lot of what's driving him to this day is the way that so many archaeologists have come after him. And honestly, if I came out with a TV show where I was talking about what Ancient Apocalypse talks about and a bunch of people called me a racist, I would probably also be very irritated, because I watched that entire show and I did not detect an inkling of racism. It was just, he doesn't mention race. And I read one of the articles that was like, everybody knows that, Graham is imagining these people as being white. And I was like, I don't think he is. I don't think it really matters what color they were. That's probably irrelevant, considering that this existed so long ago, if it did, and nobody would be recognizable to us today. And he's also talking about it being over in, North America for the most part. But, so I do think there's some bitterness there, definitely, and maybe that is probably what is driving him to keep fighting so hard. But I do agree with you. I think he probably genuinely believes this, and probably early on was a little irritated that the way he was looked at was as, a con man, or somebody just like a snake oil salesman, something like that. That probably definitely contributed to all of this when Fingerprints of the Gods first came out. I think that there is a little bit of irony that had the reception been a little bit warmer to him, then the amount of vitriol probably would have been lesser over the years. So, you got another one for us?
Yeah, sir. The next one's from Matt Keane for $4.99 saying, "Love your content, man. Really enjoy what you do. But how can you all believe the pesky Roman Empire was a thing? It's not like there's proof."
Oh, man. I mean, you know what? When that one lady from southern Kentucky really opened my eyes, I can't believe it anymore.
Well, I didn't believe in Rome until she tried to dox me. That really, that really pushed me over the edge.
That was a little, not cool.
Oh my God. Funny little piece I'll interject here, probably, like a year and a half after that whole event has died down, is to this day, all of the pages that talk about who I am as a person online say that I went to the University of Mount Olive because she interpreted UMO wrong in my fucking bio when she tried to dox me.
And what was UMO, Maine?
University of Maine, Orono.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. I got like a 7-day TikTok ban after that, because I pointed out to her, I stitched it and I was like, Donna, he went to the University of Maine, not the University of Mount Olive. They have an archaeology program. Also, and I think I capped it off with this. I was like, also, how dare you go into somebody else's credentials when you've been lying about yours this whole time? She never had a degree.
I am glad that whole event is over, but I will say that is definitely one of the most entertaining things that has happened to me in this job. That shit was hilarious.
That was so much fun. Did not enjoy all of the, conspiracy theory about me that she'd cooked up, but aside from that, it was entertaining.
At least you guys can see the silver lining in all of that.
Oh, exactly. It's secondhand fun, Now, a year and a half later, we can laugh about it.
Yeah, and that's what matters. The next one's just a fun one from Agamemnon's Gym Bag for $3.50, which always love the specific.
Yeah, he gives us very specific super chats.
Just saying, Atlantis is just a scheme to sell flood insurance.
That would be a very good campaign.
Would be a solid campaign, yeah. That would be a fun. I could see that '90s commercial.
Yeah,
the really over the top,
or like a State Farm or Farmers with
Allstate.
Yeah. Either him or
Farmers.
the one with J.K. Simmons. That's
Farmers would be appropriate, actually.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense.
Got one from your boy from 199 saying, "Archaeology and the Bible, do these mix, bussy?"
I mean, there was a very famous, I can't remember the name of the expedition, but there was a very famous World War I battle where one of the lower ranking officers in the British Army remembered a Bible passage about a pass that goes through a certain set of mountains, and they ended up using that to beat the Ottomans because the pass was still there.
Shit.
So I will say that much. I think that the Bible, when it comes to archaeology, is an invaluable resource. Because the worst thing that happens if you use the Bible as a place to start when you're looking for things is that it's not there.
It may not be a map, but it's a good compass.
Yeah, but at the very least,
yeah,
exactly.
Good way of putting it.
And also, I think the Bible's been widely misinterpreted over the ages. There used to be people who thought the Exodus happened in the 1500s BC, and all evidence actually within the Bible points to 1207 BC. So, there's the cities of Pithom and Ramses were built far, far after the 1500s under Ramses II, and so it is a good resource because it can give you a great starting point for a ton of stuff.
Yeah. Aiden is obviously a lot more well-versed in sort of biblical, knowledge than I am. But as the archaeology side of things, I can tell you that the Bible is invaluable. There is a whole field that is just called biblical archaeology. So yeah, it is like the two of them are hand in hand. It's like peanut butter and jelly.
A lot of holy texts are very good resources for history. Even
Absolutely.
if you shouldn't take them at face value, but when it comes to...
But again, as a compass, I like that analogy.
That's a good analogy.
That was a very good way of putting it.
Nice.
What else we got?
Next, we got Donovian for $5 said, Milo, what would be the one piece of evidence that would change your mind on Hancock's theory?
Interesting.
That's a phenomenal question. I would say, wow, yeah, no, that's a really good one. I think that we would need to see something a lot more centralized. So a lot of what Hancock shows throughout his series is evidence of cultures that were influenced by this alleged parent culture, where Hancock never actually shows any evidence of the parent culture itself. Now, he does go to the Bimini Road, which is something that I don't believe is an anthropological or archaeological site. So what I would need to see in order to actually believe that his theory has any credence is evidence of this parent culture itself. Now, I know that in his books, he doesn't mention this in his show, so I don't know if he still believes this, but in his books, he mentions that this parent culture existed in Antarctica. I think that is very conveniently placed because it is now completely covered in ice and we cannot access it. But if he were to present a single piece of information to me, it would be some sort of physical evidence of this lost civilization, whether it be a city, skeletal remains, or anything other than just people who were allegedly inspired at some point.
Solid answer.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Next one is from Draco Logan for £5 saying, Milo, fellow archaeologist here, you do so much to contribute to the general understanding of our field. Keep up the amazing work. So just a little bit of thanks and gratitude.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do what I can.
Bragwin for $5 said, love to see Milo collab with Gutsick Gibbon, a paleontologist slash primatologist that debunks
primates.
Got it. That debunks conspiracies on YouTube. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah. All right. That's a name
sign me up. I'd love to. That sounds great. Yeah, I'll keep that one in the notes. That's a good name.
Yeah, right. It's a cool one.
Next one's from Dylan Mott for $4.99 saying, also, what do you think of the Baltic Sea anomaly, the coast-to-coast hole story, and the Trey the Explainers Among Us phenomenon? Also, Hobby Lobby L.
Hobby Lobby is an L, but I don't know what the other ones are.
I don't understand a single thing that's said except for the Hobby Lobby thing, and the only thing I think of with Hobby Lobby is the time we had Norman on the show.
Oh, yeah.
There was the whole Hobby Lobby biblical artifacts thing. He wrote a paper on it in college, and he told us all about it. That's like episode... probably like 12.
Yeah, early in there.
So if you want to find that,
what is this
Hobby
one?
Lobby and Norman on the channel. Yeah,
like 84, I think. Next one's from Plaid.
Coast to coast whole story.
Yeah,
Baltic I don't know what that means.
I'm gonna look up Baltic Sea anomaly because that's the one that sounds familiar to me.
Coast to coast whole story and Trey the Explainers Among Us phenomenon.
Baltic Sea anomaly.
These are, at the very least, your question will be answered at a later time.
It is a geological formation. Okay. Visible is a feature visible on an indistinct sonar image taken by Peter Lindberg, Dennis Oberg, and their Swedish Ocean X diving team while treasure hunting on the floor of the northern Baltic Sea in the Gulf of Bothnia in June of 2011. And
I love that they're still treasure hunting.
I mean, that's what we're looking at.
We never stop.
I will say this much. It looks like the Millennium Falcon.
It's the Millennium Falcon!
So we found it. It was real. George didn't lie the whole time.
I will have to look it up. It is interestingly shaped for sure. Being
that's interesting.
That's circular, but it again is an indistinct sonar picture. So I'll look more into that, and I'm happy to talk about it. We can discuss.
That sounds interesting. I'm curious.
Next one is from Plaz for $2 saying, "What do y'all think of Heiser, especially Milo?"
Do you want to start? Do you know Dr. Michael Heiser?
I don't.
He is a huge favorite of mine. He actually just passed away 3 weeks ago.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, he was a PhD biblical scholar.
Okay. That's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, fluent in biblical Hebrew. Talked a lot about biblical archaeology and biblical history, and in comparison with the local religions, Mesopotamian, Canaanite, Egyptian. And in my opinion, I think he has uncovered what the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, and by extension the Protestant churches, kind of didn't talk about. He uncovered a series of supernatural elements, through lines in the Bible that don't really get discussed, and they talk about things like the heavenly host and the true nature of angels and demons in their biblical nature. I just find it to be a fascinating resource. Really takes Christianity out of being, and Judaism, out of being kind of the, be a good person, you go to heaven, be a bad person, you go to hell simplicity, and breaks it out into something that feels a lot more like a complete mythology than this sort of easy to digest Sunday school narrative. And it makes Christianity far more interesting, and also answers a lot of the basic questions that people will ask, throughout reading the Bible. But I find him to be a very fascinating scholar, and I really am disappointed that we never got the chance to talk to him. So
yeah, I'm not familiar with him until now, but I would love to look into him more. That's
you
really
would probably enjoy his takedown of Zechariah Sitchin if you go to sitchiniswrong.com. That's probably why they assumed you knew about him. If you go to sitchiniswrong.com, assuming it's still up, yeah, but he does a very good job of totally taking down Sitchin.
Now that I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Next is from Dr. She for $5 saying, for Aiden Mattis, how many points in Graham's work would you say you're in agreement with? What do you disagree with, and why?
I couldn't necessarily say points. I could more say that I'm with him probably 70% of the way, in that I could see there being the beginnings of human civilization before. First of all, I could agree with him that I think Meltwater Pulse 1b was probably catastrophic for anybody living along the coastlines. Even if it took several years, then it's enough sea level rise to become problematic, especially when you think about how that affects storms, and flooding and things like that. I'm with him on that. I am with him on the possibility that there was an early civilization. Where I really break from him is when he starts to talk about the level of advancement and the extent. I think we're probably talking not about a global culture, but rather independent, isolated little pockets of what could be described as civilization, that were probably not in communication with each other, and that simply did not have the resources to survive that degree of sea level rise in that short a period of time. When you think about what these people were building with, and even if sea levels only were rising a couple of inches a year, then they would still be able to look at that and go, well, over the last 10 years, we lost about 1.5 feet of shoreline.
Yeah.
Maybe we should move inland. So, you've got to remember, these are people. They're not animals. They're not, and even animals are actually ahead of us when it comes to tsunamis. So it seems reasonable that they may have looked at it and gone, yeah, that's probably going to keep going. We should move. But that would have, at a time when all of your writing was done on stone and clay tablets, that would have basically erased any knowledge, any written record you had. You would have had to start over from what you could remember. And when you look at how prevalent oral history is, I think that is a reasonable thing to assume. I just don't think that there is a significant amount of advancement past, the early Bronze Age. At the most.
Cool. Next one's from John Deere Boy for $10 saying, thoughts on a lot of weird weather events with relation to the day after the morrow? Parallels, differences, and things like that. So,
have you seen that movie?
I have. It was a long time ago, but I remember it vaguely.
It was
a good movie from what I remember.
Yeah,
I saw it in 10th grade.
I just remember Jake Gyllenhaal shivering the whole time.
I mean, there is one thing that you got to keep in mind when it comes to the prevalence and the rate of immense weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that. Our tracking of them has gotten significantly better. So to look at an increase in the rate of tornadoes and hurricanes and stuff like that, we're starting to notice the category 1s. and the category 2s that even 100 years ago, there was no way you were going to notice unless it caused significant damage. So we can sense everything from space now. I think focusing too much on the increase in weather events can lead you to worry that there's, something much worse going on than what is likely in large portion our ability to sense these things. I don't know if you have a different opinion, Milo.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I did environmental science, and in my time doing that, we had to do, climatology and stuff like that. We are seeing, an increase in these events, and there is obviously an increase in our ability to perceive them, which is definitely something, Aiden, that you, rightfully bring up. But we're seeing an increase in the frequency. I mean, I remember, I think it was like 2 years ago or something like that. I remember looking at like the radar, and there was like 6 hurricanes in a line throughout like all of the Atlantic, and it was like, this is a little bit much. And so a parallel, which I think would be pretty easy to draw, is, as we are currently going through sort of a climatic changing event, the people in the time period which you've been talking about through all of this podcast were also going through a climate change event. However, theirs was influenced by that meltwater plus 1b, which messed up all of the ocean currents and would have changed the way that the climate worked. Now, as we are currently going through anthropogenic climate change, we are seeing very similar things happening, just on a sort of inverse level. So as with them, it would have slowed down ocean currents. For us, it's, speeding them up. I mean, California has been hit by the amount of snow that they've got in the mountains over the course of the last year is just fucking ridiculous.
Kind of funny.
So like,
they're like, oh no,
yeah, I know,
there's
ironic,
snow,
right?
and me sitting here in Pennsylvania, and I'm like, you got like a foot.
Yeah.
Also, like, give it to us. We missed
Yeah,
it.
we missed the snow here. Come on, bring it back.
Can you please send us some?
Who said you can have that?
It is interesting. Yeah, please. I know I've been in Boston and it's like 40 degrees the whole year, and I'm like, can we have winter, please? I'd like some of that, but I guess not. Yeah, so I do think there is something to be said for there's obviously we're getting better at perceiving it. It's a mix of that and the fact that there's more of it. It's and I think only time will tell. With sort of if we want to compare it to The Edge of Tomorrow or whatever the movie, it's going to be we'll see in a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next one is from Kriplovsky for 20 pounds, saying, Greek myth refers to Tartarus as an underground place that has a similar name to Tartaria. Do you think anyone who wants to look for evidence would have any chance looking for caves in or around Mesopotamia and the Black Sea?
I can take it. Unfortunately, that has a very, very simple answer, and it is etymology. The two are completely etymologically distinct, and therefore most likely unrelated. Tartarus, of course, is being described as a great pit in mythology. Tartaria, in my understanding, it's an endonym, or at least an exonym formed off of an endonym. That meaning that an exonym means a name given to a group of people or a place by outsiders. Endonym means what you call yourselves. For example, the Dene cultures of Canada and the southwestern United States, the term Prydain, which is what the Britons used to describe themselves when the Romans and the Greeks arrived. That's why it became Britannia and then Britannia and then Britain. So that's when it comes to Tartaria, named by the Russians, Slavic languages are not etymologically related outside of the very, very distant past with Indo-European, 3000 BC. They're not related to one another. So the likelihood that Tartaria and Tartarus have anything to do with each other is very
low. So we have reached the end of the ones that are directly relevant to this until new ones come in. So these are a little bit more off topic. So the first one in relevancy there is Pumpkin Bear 7 for $1.99 said, Milo, thoughts on New Orleans?
Negative.
Well, much like Atlantis, it was buried underwater.
Yeah, honestly, New Orleans is one that I really like to go. I'm a big fan of Autumn Shea films. He was kind of my inspiration for starting YouTube, and I actually got to do a talk with him back at the end of the summer, which was really great. And he's from New Orleans, and so if I'm ever down there, I would really like to be there just to maybe get a little tour from him. I know he did tour guide stuff down there, but it seems like a cool city. Maybe I'll pass through.
Well, if you have any recommendations, I have to be there for work starting Wednesday until Saturday. So
I do have a recommendation. Bring a snorkel.
Will do. The next one is from your boy from $1.99 saying, who has the best hair?
Oh shit.
I have the darkest hair.
I have the lightest
I have the longest hair.
I somehow have the lightest beard.
Do you?
I think so.
That's weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
Because I'm the blonde one.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see, you're
How
more
did that
strawberry
happen?
blonde.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have, it's, first of all, I'm laughing at myself calling this a beard, but we're working on it.
Dude, I feel that.
I have not fully shaved since November. I just trim.
Yep.
Keep it a reasonable 3 millimeters.
I don't have anything that grows above my jawline, so.
Yeah, you're trying your best.
I'm doing what I can.
Personally, I mean, I cannot put my hair in a ponytail.
I just started being able to do that. I'm not going to lie.
Yo.
It is kind of nice to have the, oh yeah, I have a fellow long hair person
Yeah.
here. It is kind of nice once you can finally do that again, where it's like, oh, I can feel like I have short hair and my neck can breathe. But then when I want it, I have the mane again. It's just very nice.
That was the worst part. I know. I've been doing this for a long time. I got to say, getting into the bun stage was a stage I never thought I was going to be able to reach. Not only be able to do the ponytail, but to fold it back on itself. I don't know if I needed to go this far.
Yeah, I was looking through trying to find a picture of you to use before you sent me one for the thumbnail, and I came across some like really old ones from like probably like 3-4 years ago. Yeah, that was like, you had longer hair when I started seeing them on TikTok.
What the hell was that cut? God damn.
What else you got for us here?
So your boy just gave one that is a bit more relevant to what we were discussing, which is any notable biblical archaeological discoveries, such as Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, the Dead Sea Scrolls V2, and I guess anything that's relevant.
I mean, I have one that I can think of. I don't know if you have any that are recent.
I'm not a biblical guy.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me is the Mount Ebal tablet. We've mentioned this on a few shows, especially last summer when it was really hitting the news. There was a little 2 centimeter, I think by 2 centimeter tablet found on Mount Ebal in Israel, which is a mountain mentioned in Deuteronomy. There's a line of Deuteronomy where they're told, put a curse on Mount Ebal. And this has always been thought to be a kind of like, vague, like symbolic thing, go to Mount Ebal and, say, you are cursed, mountain. What they found was at a site they believe dates to about 1200 BC. They found a copper tablet that is 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters that is inscribed with the phrase, Yahweh put a curse upon you, ye are cursed by Yahweh, which of course Yahweh being one of the Hebrew names for God, for the big God, the big guy,
the dude,
which would dial back the writing of Hebrew if that dating is confirmed. I think it's yet to be peer reviewed, but again, the last time I really looked into this deeply was last summer. But when it was discovered, they dated it to about 1200 BC, which would take the date of Jewish specific writing in Israel back about 400 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It goes from, we start to see Hebrew writing in around 800 BC, and that's also the first, currently the oldest attested mention of Yahweh, and it's in Canaanite mythology. That would take it back 400 years, which might bring it beyond its entrance into Canaanite mythology. Which would then tell us for certain who came up with Yahweh first. If it was in 1200, then it was the Jews. If it was not, it might have been the Canaanites, which would give you a very. Basically, this could confirm that that the Jews brought Yahweh into Canaan from Egypt, and there was no Egyptian god known as Yahweh, which would mean that dates the god Yahweh to being original to the Israelite peoples.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really cool one. It's very exciting.
Neat.
So we did just get a couple more relevant ones.
Sure.
One was from, where we go? We got Agamemnon's gym bag for 2130. Love the specific one. I think it would be beneficial for academics to entertain this kind of stuff. In my opinion, stuff that is obvious to experts is too often dismissed outright, where it may not be so obvious to the average Joe. Thoughts?
I think that's kind of where we come in.
Spot on. No, it really is. I mean, that's one of the things that I think I noticed a lot while doing the Ancient Apocalypse thing is like, it's, I don't want to run the risk of calling everyone who watched Ancient Apocalypse of like, oh, you guys just don't know it. You need to be trained in this. I don't think you need to be trained in it. But, Graham Hancock capitalizes on the fact that not everyone is trained in archaeology. I mean, he doesn't, do, in my opinion, his due diligence, sort of explaining a lot of the the foundation of a lot of the things he's talking about, which allows him to sort of get away with saying things and making them seem simpler than they actually are.
Yeah.
I mean, when talking about sea level rise, I mean, Aiden, you gave a perfect example of what the sea level rise was actually like during the Younger Dryas, where his implication is sort of just like, oh my god, it all went up at once, and where'd everyone go? And like, you need to kind of have these like foundational things. And so I do think that like, it's unfortunate when professionals sort of dismiss this stuff, because not everyone has a foundation in this. Very few people, like most people, are a layman when it comes to very specific, academic fields. And so it's our responsibility as the people who are trained in it to be able to make it digestible so that everyone can understand it. So
yeah, I think that there's definitely a space. And as I talked to my professors in grad school, and I had a very candid conversation with one of them last semester, and basically the conclusion was, with where academia is right now, it's kind of stagnant. There's not a ton of jobs, especially in the history field. Basically, what I was told in vague terms was, keep doing what I'm doing and don't expect to get a job as a professor.
Thank you.
And that it's better for me to keep doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Because there's just no work. And so much of it really is as simple as sitting in front of a class and talking about history, and every couple of years writing a journal article. So I think that there's definitely a space, and I wish that some of the more talented professors when it comes to presentation and teaching would get into the podcasting and YouTube space, because there's such a wide...
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I don't think they know that they can make so much more money than they make.
Oh yeah, no, they could make
as
absolute
professors.
Bank doing this shit. Yeah.
Yeah, it, like, obviously not every single one of them, but if you try it, if you simply like, I'm sure that this is not going to be the most popular thing for me to say in front of you, but if you look at Jordan Peterson, like, the way he got big on the internet was by just recording his lectures and posting them to YouTube. So I think if a lot more professors just started doing that, they could reach a lot more people and they could make a lot more money. Yeah, it would be a little bit of a detriment to those of us who are still trying to go the traditional route, but education as we know it.
Don't let them know.
Yeah, the university system,
the undergrads or the graduates need to take this one.
the university system as it exists today has only existed for the past 1,000 years, and that's in the vaguely similar way. At first, it was you had noblemen who were paying monks and philosophers to come speak to them around 1100 AD. At Paris and at Cambridge and at Oxford. It's morphed into what we have today. It won't always be what we have today. And I think at this point, where information is so readily available to anybody with an internet connection, we're going to probably start to see a shift where education is no longer formed around what you're doing in class and your grades, but rather around, receiving a passing exam grade from an accredited institution that just says that you know the stuff you know. And I think that would probably be for the better.
Yeah, and I think it even goes beyond that, just because of the fact that the way society is based in terms of university and then careers passed on beyond it, is that the entire point of college at this point is really to just get a piece of paper that says you did a thing.
Yeah, somebody did mention something in the chat that I just want to get to really quick, because I this is a big one that I see. The Sphinx.
Oh, the water.
Can you explain to me, in the same way you did it last time, how the Sphinx erosion makes sense? Because to me, the sandblasting does make sense, but you're the guy.
Yeah. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, there's a hypothesis that the Sphinx was built, a lot longer ago than archaeologists say it was built. The evidence for this comes from erosion along the sides of it, which are partway up, which people claim to be water erosion, and they, postulate the idea that it was built while the Sahara, this part of the desert was still green, and so it must be like 6,000 years old instead of 4,000 years old or something like that. Now, I have yet to actually see super compelling evidence for this. A lot of the erosion that you see on the sides of the Sphinx is sloped, which makes sense when you consider the fact that it was completely buried in dunes by the time it was found again. And so when you have this sort of sloped surface of sand, and you have wind blowing up it, which is coming all across the desert with nothing to stop it, it will literally just sandblast the shape of this dune onto the side of the Sphinx. And when under water and air work in much the same way as far as like their properties when they are moving, and so when you consider this, you're really using more of a sandblasting method than the water. Now, another piece which people have brought up is the idea that there's these like little like trickle kind of striations down the side of the Sphinx. And that must be evidence that water was running off of it at one point. And now, while it does look like water erosion, I think that there are two very much more likely hypotheses, which one is it is sand doing the exact same thing and falling down over the course of 4,000 years and creating similar patterns. And also the fact that even though it is a desert, it does rain there. Not very much, but 4,000 years on a very soft stone, and you will begin to see some sort of changes. So for me, I just haven't seen nearly enough evidence to actually support the fact that this is that old. Not to mention the fact that there are carvings on it which literally date to exactly when it was built. Like they say, like who it was built for, who built it. There's, you know, like the workers' camps around it and stuff.
Right.
So it's not like some like mystery just found in the middle of the desert. It's like, no, it is an in context site with all of the, you know, necessary documentation about what it is, and surrounded by buildings associated with its construction. It's not as much of a mystery as I think some people would like to have us believe.
Yeah, I like that explanation. That makes sense.
Cheers.
Next, we got John Hasewager for $4.99 saying, takes on Schliemann, besides him being what Graham must imagine all archaeologists are like.
I think Schliemann's a lot closer to Graham Hancock than he is to any other archaeologist. I mean, the guy basically went, I think this is there, and then dug through so many layers of other stuff, and then eventually found what he said was there. But, God, I mean, on the one hand, the man did a huge thing for history and archaeology by showing that Troy existed. But on the other hand, how much we must have lost when he was just basically drilling through the ground.
Plowing through it.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be the guy that starts something, but I just wish he could have done it a little bit less destructively.
Yeah, no, that's something you'll see with a lot of like different, you know, early archaeology is just how much stuff was lost doing it. Like it's pretty astonishing. I was just down in Philly at the Penn Museum, and they were talking about, you know, the Penn Museum was built. I know I should have come by and said hi. I'll have to do it next time. Yeah, fuck you. And while I was down there, you know, they were talking about how they built this museum because of the excavations at Ur. And he's like, you can still go. The archaeologist, Dr. Hafford, who was the one who I did the Baghdad or the Dendera Light video with, or no, the Baghdad Battery video with. He was talking. He was like, you know, you can still go there and see. Woolley was the guy who did the first excavations at Ur. He's like, the piles that they dug out are literally just massive piles of pottery because they just didn't bother taking anything that wasn't fully intact, so they just toss it in the pile. And it's like all of this shit that you guys just broke and left in a giant pile it's hilarious how terrible the ethics were back then.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look back and respect that the guy was right.
Oh, he was. Yeah, no, I can't argue that. But at what cost?
You do have to wonder maybe if they were like, yeah, you might be right, but let's be careful about this. Maybe things would have gone better. It's that constant thing of, you know, someone's got a really good idea, and then a bunch of other people are like, now hold on, we don't know if we agree with you, but we're also not going to help you investigate it. Like,
Zenith25 for $10 said, where are you guys on the eight? Oh no, you just covered that.
That actually works really well. The Sphinx thing.
Then it was the Sphinx question. Yeah. Operator Unknown for $5 said, is there any socio-political reasons or theories why any of you might think that these deep dives into the Younger Dryas might not be publicly explored?
No.
Nah, I can't think of any reason. And I know why you would ask that question. There was a lot of articles when this came out. You know, Graham Hancock's a racist. I think that race is a very easy smokescreen for when you don't want to engage with something, and you don't want other people to ask you why you're not engaging with it. I've seen a lot of people, both left and right, called racist because they brought something up because that you know, people didn't want to explain why they disagreed with it. And it was the easiest way to get the masses to kind of go along with it. Every once in a while, somebody comes along and says something that's actually extremely racist, and we should acknowledge that. But, you know, I think I think in the case of Graham Hancock, it was a way for the media to kind of just not deal with what he was saying in the way that you, Milo, have, which is to actually take it head on and show people. You know, I think they make the assumption that everyone is stupid. Everyone is not stupid. Now, a lot of people are. That's fair. But everyone is not. And a lot of people could probably have handled sitting down and reading a Guardian article or watching a PBS special, something like that, on why Graham Hancock is wrong. And I think that they kind of gave it this idea that it's about race or socioeconomic status, because that way they didn't have to actually confront it. And as you can see, it's very confrontable. Like,
and the difficulty I think with that, Aiden, I think that, like, you know, when people sort of bring up that side of Hancock's arguments, I didn't see a single one of them actually execute it in the way that I personally think it should have been executed. Do I think Hancock is racist? Absolutely fucking not. Like, he does not postulate anything that is inherently racist throughout the series of his show. But it is worth noting, and I think this is something that a lot of these, different publications were touching on, is the idea that some of the things he said would be things that racists would agree with. Because a lot of his theories are things that are, like, based on the idea that, like, someone had to come and teach these people how to do this. And, you know, we see that a lot. You know, I've talked about this on my channel before, is the idea that, like, the one that has really popularized, you know, Atlantis and a lot of these sort of lost civilization things were the Nazis. Does that mean Hancock is a Nazi? No. Does that mean the people who believe in Atlantis are Nazis? Absolutely not. But it is worth noting that, like, when you are putting these things out into the world, who are going to be the people who are going to take these arguments and believe in them? So even though Hancock is not trying to postulate an inherently racist ideology, when he puts these things out into the world, they are bits and pieces of things that a racist person could look at and be like, ah, yes, see, the indigenous people of North America didn't know how to do that, and it was the, you know, Atlanteans who came from the sea. So it is, you know, it's important to find, like, a middle ground on that, and that, I think, is what's so frustrating when it comes to people who immediately jump to just Hancock is racist, because then everyone stops listening, and then it's like, well, now we can't even talk about it. Like, we need to actually look at, like, what are the implications of this? What is the origins of some of this theory? Because it's a lot more nuanced than just he is inherently making a show and being like, this is what these people are better than these people or whatever. So you raise a really good point with that, because that was something I was seeing as well that was really frustrating, because I didn't see anyone actually tackle it with the nuance that I think it deserves to be touched with.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
But, yeah.
We got another relatively relevant one before we jump into the other one, saying from Ryan Tanner for $5, saying, Aiden, look into Wilhelm Schmidt's original monotheism theory. Most interesting thing I learned getting a theology degree, and it's right up your alley.
We'll look into that. Wilhelm Schmidt's original monotheism.
Yes.
And
then going back up, let's see.
The dog has made another appearance.
Would the dog
thank
like
God.
To make a proper appearance?
Would you like to come up and say hello?
What is the name of the dog?
Archie.
Archie, yes.
Archie.
Yeah, he studies archaeology.
Nice.
Milo, somebody earlier on was asking, it's your boy for $1.99, saying, what are your credentials specifically, just to give people context about where you're coming from?
Absolutely. So I am officially trained at the University of Maine. So to give a little bit of background of my sort of academic experience, I went to Voctech High School, where I studied environmental science. When I first went there, I wanted to do engineering, but I was like, was not cut out for it, so I did environmental science. And throughout my time there, I've been interested in archaeology since I was about this big, but they didn't offer anything in archaeology at Voctech. So I went to, when college started to come around, I was like, okay, I think I want to do archaeology for college. And I was looking at Boston University and a couple other places. But I talked to my, guidance counselor about it, and he was like, archaeology, you're not going to make much money in it. You should just stick with environmental science. And being foolish, I was like, fine, I'll stick with environmental science. So I picked a school based on that instead. Sophomore year rolls around, and I'm like, okay, like, environmental science is great, but I know I want to do archaeology. So I go and I talk to my guidance counselor, and I'm like, okay, I want a double major. And they're like, well, we can't offer it as a major. We can give it to you as a minor. So I took archaeology as a minor, and then I took all of the anthropology classes that UMaine offered, because I was like, I just want to get as much of this as I can. So currently I have my degree in both environmental science and archaeology, and I eventually plan on going on to pursue a PhD in archaeology at some point. But right now I'm like, I want to just take a break, because I've been in school for the last, 20 years, and I'm kind of tired of it.
Take a break, make some money, enjoy life.
Exactly. And honestly, one of the things that I found to be the most rewarding about doing this as a job is I feel like I've learned more doing this job than I did when I was in school. Like, this has just forced me to, like, think and research and do all of this stuff that, like, I just haven't been able to do. And college was great, because all of the archaeology classes that I took helped me build this really strong foundation, and just sort of, understanding how the field works and how the discipline works and stuff like that. But doing my, sort of external research, now that this is my job, has just been so informative to be able to build my knowledge base farther than I ever thought it was possible.
Yeah. I agree. I learned what I learned in college that was really valuable was how to learn. It was how to research and study independently.
Absolutely.
It wasn't necessarily that I use any of the facts that I learned every day, but when it comes to doing these videos, the reason we can pump out a video a week is because I learned how to research so well in college. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, you want to lead us into the next?
Yes. This is a relatively one from Essel Jazak for $100, saying, "Been watching since the beginning, but I'm very rarely able to make it to a live stream. Glad I was able to tonight. I remember watching your very first podcast live and attending a few of the old after live stream campfires. Love seeing how much your channel has grown."
Well, thank you. You've been here so a while then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long
actually
time.
After
wow.
podcast campfire chats.
Yeah, that was way long ago, like early.
Yeah.
A couple of unrelated ones as well. Operator Unknown for $5 said, totally unrelated. Both Aiden's and Miniminuteman. Would you rather marry a French person and live in Ohio, or marry a French person
and live in Ohio, or vice versa? Marry an Ohioan and live in France.
Got it. P.S. Joining membership next month.
Oh well, thank you. I'll let you answer that one first.
Ooh. God, I don't know which one's worse. Live it.
My thinking is, at least in Ohio, I'm around less French people. Like, I'm around one French person a lot, but I'm not around them all the time.
Yeah.
And,
I like that theory. I like that philosophy.
It's just flat Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So
how different can it be?
I will admit, more recently, I am less inclined to live in Ohio, but I hope they get that cleaned up soon enough. We make fun of Ohio a lot, but in honesty, I feel bad for them
deserve
right
that.
now.
I mean, come on.
They did not deserve chemical train exploding.
No, not at all.
We took this one too far, guys.
Yeah, this is the man-made horrors beyond our comprehension.
Man.
We make jokes.
I don't know, man.
Good.
I don't know. I was going to say I would initially go for France until Aiden pointed out that there's more French people there.
Yeah.
Just because France is bigger. I feel like there's more options of places to choose to live, but the downside is that everyone's French. Sometimes you got to take the L.
Exactly. It's and the French woman can be Americanized.
Depends on how French she is.
I convince her.
I'll colonize her. She did it. She did it here. I'll do it to her.
It's amazing. Full circle.
Oh, it's the circle of life.
Oh, terrible.
Next is Origami Kamiful for $5 said, question for all of you. How do you keep your optimism in the face of all of the craziness you deal with online?
Alcohol?
Ooh. Cheers to that.
A general...
I don't know.
General optimism.
My philosophy is that, like, I don't know. I think life is too short to be taken seriously. The second I start to take things too seriously is when it starts to stress me out. And so as long as I'm just like, man, it's fucking, it's whatever. That's just what I try to do. Like, if you disagree, you disagree. I can only do so much of it, you know?
Up until yesterday, I was handling everything pretty well.
Fair. Fair.
Yeah.
There's one too many curveballs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one from Operator
This cheer is a facade.
Yeah.
And the dog helps too.
He does help a lot.
It's a nice...
This is why he's here.
Yes.
Yeah.
An unofficial emotional support animal.
Yeah. Well, he's official. He has documentation.
Does really?
Yeah.
Look at you,
He's
buddy.
He's just staring at you.
Yeah.
He's degreed.
Yeah.
Damn.
You might be one of the most qualified at this table.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Look at him go. Operator Unknown was following up from the previous comment about the societal limitations about certain topics in the public eye, saying, I didn't mean Hancock specifically for the socio-political reasons, but more so media presentation presenting certain stories as conspiracy in an overall sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Ooh. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And honestly, I think that's a really great question. One I guess, piece that I'll sort of bring up, I don't really know if this sways in either direction, but there was a really interesting case that we talked about in my paleoecology class in college, where one of the students there, she was a grad student, and she was currently working on a archaeological excavation in one of the islands off of South America. I can't remember what it was, or which island it was. But they were like completely unable to release the information that they were finding at it because it was all genetic evidence, and genetic evidence is so highly tied up in politics. So, like, if you find the oldest genetic evidence of, like, your people being present on this island, you have, like, a claim to it.
Yeah.
And so, like, she was like, if we release the information from this study without, like, to, like, the general public, without, like, really, like, making sure we're getting this right, like, we could start a war. And so that was a really interesting topic, because normally when we hear about, you know, like, oh, the media is trying to cover it up and stuff, we think of it like a sort of conspiracy, they're all working against us thing. But it was really interesting hearing that, and her being like, no, like, I literally, like, I have an NDA, I cannot talk about this, like, because of the potential repercussions.
Hey, Milo, what time are you good to go till?
That depends, my friend.
We're are you good for another 15, 30?
Yeah, I can do 15 more. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, cool. So we'll take it 15 more.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Agamemnon Ginbag for $2 said, the French do love their liberty, though, in relation to the previous
I mean, they say they do.
They do,
but then they joined the Nazis so quickly.
They do know how to throw a riot/revolt.
I would say they enjoy their riots more than they do their liberty.
Probably, yeah.
I like how you can check on France at any given time in the modern era. You just be like, oh, what's going on in France? And the answer is a riot.
Yes, a riot. Yeah, it's the simple pleasures, you know.
Exactly. No, you gotta do something on the weekend.
Exactly. Now we're going to go through pretty much just like all the random ones that came in from Super Chats. John Deere Boy for $5 saying, asserting John Deere supremacy. Also, hello from Redacted.
Oh, well, thank you, John Deere Boy.
Thank you, John Deere Boy.
Hello from Redacted. Good for you.
Maybe that means he's the redacted tier on Patreon?
I was assuming that.
Yeah, that's probably what that means.
Jack Garcia.
Our top tier just says redacted. It doesn't have a title.
Nice, nice. That's good.
And oh, here we go. This is a good one from your boy for $4.99. Milo, biggest pet peeve about the general population's misconceptions about archaeology. Maybe something that is a myth about archaeology?
Damn. Ooh, that's a tough one. Biggest pet peeve. Well, I guess I'll try and come up with something on the fly, because there's many things. I'm sure I can't come up with the best one right now. But honestly, I would say it's the willingness to accept something. It's the willingness to accept someone who claims to have all the answers, because science is not about having all the answers, and that's a really frustrating misconception. It's the idea that it's like, the scientists say they know everything. We don't. If you ask me to sit down here right now and have like a theological debate about the origin of life, I could not tell you one way or another. Maybe it was God, maybe it was luck, maybe I just could not tell you. But like, it frustrates me when, you know, someone like Hancock comes on and, like, you know, claims to be like, this site is connected to this site, is connected to this site, and all of it makes sense, and here's the whole thing, I have tied a little bow on it, and there you go. And that is just not the way that science works. So it's really frustrating to see people, you know, who when, I don't know, yeah, when you are able to just sugarcoat something and tie it all together and just hand it as one complete parcel, and the willingness to accept that without the understanding that most stuff we just don't know.
Good point, yeah. Greek Filter for $5 said, Milo, are you going to go back to having themed drinks to your videos?
Someday I would very much like to. At the moment, actually, the Ancient Apocalypse video that I just did is going to be my last video in front of the blackboard. At least the last video in front of the blackboard in that location. So right now I'm working on doing some projects that are going to be coming up where kind of the world is going to be my blackboard. But, you know, when I do end up getting that set up again, I would love to actually resume the awful archaeology and start doing drinks again.
Nice. This one more seems like a general one from Bobcat for $5 saying, what are your thoughts about the frequency of underground cities in cultural memory and the Agartha myth?
Agartha, the Hollow Earth civilization that lies beneath. That supposedly you can enter through the North and South Pole. Hollow Earth.
Love it.
Those, I can't think of a large number of those that pop up at all before the 19th century. Like, basically every story I've heard about Hollow Earth cropped up during the, like, Romantic or later period.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where I think that having, you know, folklore of it, yeah, some of it could pertain to, like, people who lived in caves and things, but I also think that it's one of those things where it's like talking about people that came from the sky or people that came from the sea. It's just our romanticization of, you know, places that we can't access. You know, it's like, what's beneath your feet? I don't know. Maybe people live down there. What's in the sky? I don't know. It's probably God. What's in the, you know, ocean? It's mermaids. Like, you know, you can kind of point to anything you don't know and just be like, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So,
let's see. Are you looking for the guy who just asked.
Yeah, I was definitely going to do that, but I figured I'd ask a question in the meantime. Let's see what we got.
Daniel, if you want to send it again as a regular chat.
Oh, wait, there it is.
Oh,
I have it here.
Oh, okay.
Daniel Wheeler for $5 saying, Exodus 5, 6 through 20. Apparently 2 cities named Ramses 1 and 2 show bricks with and without straw, respectively. Bible proven, LOL. Thoughts on this?
I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about the inclusion of straw as being significant. And also, I don't believe it's Ramses 1 and 2. I think you're talking about Pithom and Pi-Ramses, which are 2 separate cities. It would also it could theoretically make sense that one be different materials as well, due to changes in elevation, proximity to the river. You know, there's a number of factors. I don't know about the straw aspect though. I wouldn't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is just an improved quality of construction materials, but you know.
Sorry, that's not a very significant answer.
Yeah.
But an answer nonetheless.
Yes. Problematic Farmer for $10 saying supporting the boys. My mom says hello to Milo.
Oh.
Hello, Problematic Farmer's mom. Nice to meet you.
Operator Unknown for $2 said any redacted crock.
Oh, good. No.
No.
Do not finish reading that. The YouTube censors will come for us.
The mystery chat.
I'll tell you what it said later.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know what it is now that I've finished reading it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. That's why I do this now.
Boys.
Let's see. Pumpkin for $1.99 said Volume 4 of Marble Hornets confirmed. Does that have context for either of you?
Marble Hornets. I'm not sure when it came in, so I'm not sure what it was in reference to. Marble Hornets was a web series, an analog horror series from like 2011, I want to say, like early, YouTube. It might be 2009. Very interesting series. It's a lot of fun to watch all the way through. I did it on stream a few times, but just very, very creepy. Like came out of the whole Slender Man craze.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So very, very good horror series. Doesn't do a ton to actually like jump scare you, but it makes you feel uneasy all the way through. And there's like 80 some episodes. They range from like 2.5 minutes to like 18 minutes.
Christmas loving engineer for $20 said going on vacation in Appalachia next month. Best case I get a good vacation. Worst case y'all get another missing 411.
Well, try not to go missing, Christmas loving engineer. We'd rather not add to the catalog.
Yeah, let's avoid that at all.
That said, we were down there in November, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Beautiful land.
At least in the Tennessee. I mean,
we were in the Smokies.
Yep. Let's see. Agamemnon's gym bag for $7.48. Early on, saying too captivated to come up with silly things to make you read. Here's my money. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Agamemnon.
Creative Arley for $4.99 saying been here a while, wanted to correct an offhand comment from last stream. I have epilepsy and it is not a sleep disorder. Other than that, keep it up.
Oh, I think I saw your email. I believe what I meant to say was narcolepsy and other sleep disorders, and I ended up saying epilepsy. I make mistakes. It happens.
Freudian slip. Never make a mistake again.
Yeah, exactly. How dare I? But yeah, that was a mistake on my part. Probably due to the fact that I was exhausted.
The digital footprint means that we're not allowed to mess up.
The digital what?
Footprint.
You said footprint.
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
Well, it's,
words are hard.
You messed up.
Exactly. Canceled.
Case and point. See you guys.
Fired. He gets fired once a week at this point.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah. Fired on stream. Get fired.
Yep. Get wrecked, son.
NLG noises. In the back.
Yeah, exactly. Oh boy. Just hit markers on my face every time I say a word wrong. Ria Chu White for $2.99, $20 hit marker. My husband and I love y'all's content. We've been following from the start. My husband was curious about how to apply to be a ranger for the Lore Lodge when it actually happens. He has a law enforcement and wilderness experience.
Whew, we will post
There's the application.
If we ever get to the point where we have the money to hire rangers.
Yeah, if we ever even have an actual physical lodge and are capable of doing that, we'll let you know.
Yeah, there will be a post. Yeah, but that's probably a long way off.
Yep. But hopefully,
got a lot of
impossible.
money to make before we invest in that.
Yeah. Yeah, we need our own homes first.
Yeah, currently we live in apartments.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good start.
Yeah, right. Like,
Dylan Mod for 499 said, "Hey guys, first time watching the stream at work. You guys have gotten me through my job at a ski resort in the Poconos.
is it Elk?
Yeah, which is it?
Because we're not far from there.
Yo,
Yeah, Elk is kind
my
of
dad grew up
go-to.
teaching at Elk Mountain.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That's where
Yeah.
I went
Yeah.
snowboarding for the first time.
Yeah,
and
that's
made it down
really
the mountain exactly once.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch, I'll need to tell him.
Yeah,
Go
it
figure.
messed up my knee pretty bad.
Yeah, I grew up going to
Nice.
Elk Mountain with my family and family friends, and so we went up as a group, and we tried to rent stuff for him and some of the other members of the group, and of course they were out of helmets when we got there.
Perfect.
So he
Best
and I,
thing to be out of.
exactly.
Right.
So he and I had to share one, and so I was supposed to try and teach him to snowboard, but because I had to give him my helmets, he went up with someone else, and yeah, by the time he came back after one run, he was like, "I'm done for the day," and I was like, "Well, fair enough."
My knee was not working properly at that point.
Yep.
Ooh, yeah, that would do it.
Wyo Laskin for 199 said, "Milo, are there any cryptids you want to be found?"
Oh, Bigfoot, hands down. Bigfoot's fucking awesome. I think Bigfoot and the Yeti are the two that have the most potential biological evidence of like the big ones.
Yeah.
Because they're the big one that I've heard a lot when talking about the Yeti and whatnot is it's close enough to in Asia it's close enough to great apes and whatnot
Yeah.
that there could be a species of great ape that has evolved to live at these higher altitudes. Similar to the Yeti or the Sasquatch in North America, where there has been we're finding some evidence that there could have been some sort of hominid presence in North America before Homo sapiens made it here. So is it possible
Oh, I know.
that there could be something? Now, if there was one that, regardless of whether or not there's evidence, just like my personal favorite sort of cryptid, jackalope. Jackalope is the best cryptid. There is absolutely no argument about that. Fucking yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say when he was looking at me for was when we were doing the research for Roanoke, and I have done zero research into this past reading the book that was written by William Strachey in 1612. He says, just on page 26, casually, that the natives of the Chesapeake, the Jamestown region specifically, that they hunt apes in the mountains. Which is a weird thing to have in a book from 1612.
Yeah,
considering
that's very
there have
weird.
not been primates in North America for 26 million years.
Yeah.
One person suggested to me that apes was how they referred to less civilized natives, and that it was just lost in translation. But the thing about that is that up in Vancouver, in British Columbia, a little bit to the east of that, the Chehalis people talk about the Saskets, which is where we get the term Sasquatch. And the way they describe them are as slightly larger, like 6'6" to 7 foot human beings with broader shoulders, more muscle mass in their upper body, who live out in the forests, in caves and mountains. So I just found that fascinating. Like,
That's
maybe
interesting.
Bigfoot is not. Maybe we're looking for the wrong thing.
Yeah, no, and it could be one of those things where, like, if it was like an evolutionary holdout that made it, like, I wouldn't be shocked if at this point it is something that is extinct, but it has just existed in our cultural memory, to this point. And so it's an interesting one, as funny as it is to watch those Bigfoot shows where it's just a bunch of, like, drunk dudes running around in the woods with guns is like, that's awesome. But also, like, from a, like, purely, like, anthropological and like evolutionary perspective, like there could be something to be said for both the Yeti and the Sasquatch because they are like things that are related to or could be related to extant great apes. So
nice,
interesting.
Got a couple of new ones here. Let's see.
Oh boy, what time is it? Yeah, let's
9:09.
Let's take one more and then wrap up here.
Let's see. Somebody said the jackalope was originated in Wyoming.
Makes sense.
I would say.
Oh, we can read that one later.
Yeah.
What about on the list?
They're all kind of also relatively. Somebody did ask when the next Weird Bible is.
Oh, last Tuesday of every month.
Yep. And then this decent one. Aiden Pack of 499 said, "Hey boys, PNW Aiden here. Have you ever heard of any lore from old Western mining towns?"
Not that springs to mind. The one that does, strike me isn't quite Western. It's southeastern southern Alaska. The town of Portlock, which was a mining and canning town, mining and fishing town. I think it was primarily a cannery.
I'm familiar with this one. Yeah, I know Portlock. Yeah,
abandoned in, I want to say, the 1910s, the early 1900s. It was abandoned, and a lot of the stories were about people going missing and then their body parts turning up in the bay, or people having like very large objects.
There we go.
So yeah, Portlock is the one that comes to mind, probably because it's the best documented, and it's the one that I would probably be the most interested in getting to the bottom of at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with too many. There's one, I can't remember the name of the creature. It's like the Namgog or something like that. It's like it originated in logging camps in the U.S. and it was like some really tall hippopotamus-looking creature with like a really long, flat mouth and no knees, and it would just walk with its legs like this.
Weird.
It was one of those like the fearsome beast tales that they would tell to sort of haze the newcomers. One person is like, "I've heard this thing in the woods," and then someone else is like, "Yeah, well, I also heard that thing in the woods," and before you know it, this poor guy is absolutely shitting himself. But they're fun. I'm sure there's 500,000 that have been lost, which is another piece that I think will be really interesting to know.
Yeah, if there's like the hide behind is one of those. The squonk comes out of the same thing. The squonk is Pennsylvania's state cryptid. It is a capybara-looking creature that lives out in the woods and is so ugly and self-conscious about its ugliness that if you even look at it, it melts into a pile of tears.
Oh, that's
actually
so
really sad.
Poor guy.
Oh my god. That's great.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, all that said, I think this was a pretty great show. I had a good time. This was a great one. Milo, is there anything you want to plug to people who might be watching this that aren't watching you?
Well, for anyone who's interested in, what I have to say about Ancient Apocalypse, episode 3, the second to last episode of my review, will be coming out this upcoming week, where I will be talking about Gobekli Tepe and I believe some other sites in Turkey. So if you're at all interested in hearing what I have to say about Graham Hancock's opinions on Gobekli Tepe, you are more than welcome to check that out. Otherwise, Aiden, it's been great having you guys having me on. Thank you so much for having me here. It was a blast, so I guess that's pretty much all I got. So thanks so much for everyone for tuning in.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for stopping by, hanging out with us. If you have not yet, check out the Lore Lodge's coffee, Mount Pocono Perk from Tableau Roasting Company. That link is in the description, as are a few others. If you want to check us out, and if you are the type who prefers to listen to your podcasts via audio, we also have all of these on Spotify, Apple, all that, and they usually go up the Tuesday afterwards.
Correct.
So you can follow us over there as well. And we'll have, if you haven't seen the Roanoke video, go check that out, by the way. That was a fun one. It's 80 minutes long. You will have a good time. But that said, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.